of the inaugural ceremony, Professor Zedden Patil, retired professor and dean, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Keynote speaker of the webinar, Professor Lean Pierce, Department of English and Creative Writing, University of Lancaster, UK. Esteemed plenary speakers for this webinar over the 2 days, Professor Leslie Murray, Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Brighton, UK. Professor Anura Manatunga, Department of Archaeology, University of Kelaniya, Colombo, Sri Lanka. Professor M.S. Hussain, Department of English, Jahangirnagar University, Savar, Dhaka, Bangladesh. Professor Jiblal Sapkota, Head, Department of English, Tribhuvan University, Kirtipur, Kathmandu, Nepal. Professor Nandana Dhakta, Professor, Department of English, Gauhati University. Dr. A.J. Khan, Associate Professor, Department of English, Nagaland University. Participants of the webinar, my dear colleagues and students. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome you all to the 2-day international webinar entitled Rethinking Aging, Disease and Death in the 21st Century, organized by the Department of English, Bodoland University. It is because of the pandemic that we have gone online for the seminar. It would have been a different pleasure for us to go offline and we would have acquired different experience of the discussions. Now that this is the demand of time, we have to follow it and work with changed setting. I think each and every one of us is part of today's seminal topic. So we have an opportunity today to combine both scholarship and experience. It is all about how we make our life happy. It is all about how we go normal with aging, disease, and death. Besides, it is all about how we feel for each other and take care of each other with sympathy and virtue. Each of us, whatever may be our position, ought to feel deeply today about aging, disease, and death. Time moves on in a cyclic process. Today, it may be somebody else's turn to suffer from aging, diseases, and death. Tomorrow, we will be into it. So, we are to think holistically. I'm sure honorable speakers will enlighten us in these 2 days with new ideas in this line and the representation of aging, disease, and death in literature. Hopefully, when the webinar is over, the participants would have got new insight, knowledge, and vision of life. Thank you. Now I request Professor Pradeep Kumar Patre sir, the respected rector of Bodoland University and head of the Department of English, to address the audience. Sir? Sir, you are muted, sir.
Now, do you hear me? Good morning,
yes,
everyone. University professor. Today's chief guest, Professor Jalauddin Patil, who is a retired professor and dean of the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad. Senior Professor Nandana Dhakta, Gauhati University, English Department. I also saw Professor Ashok Mahapatra to have joined. Hello, sir. All our honorable plenary speakers, keynote speaker, Professor Lean Pierce of Lancaster University, my dear colleagues, participants, students, and all who are interested in this seminar. So it's nice meeting to you, first of all, during the pandemic. This is a seminar that was planned long back, and I thought that we should take up some unemployment topics which will be of use to us. We will not just be going in a formal way, formal academic exercise, which will bring some sense in our mindset. First of all, in the mindset of the academics, we should go for some valuable research which is need-based. So that's why I thought that we will be holding a seminar like this That is what is entitled Rethinking Aging, Disease and Death in 21st Century. Uh, while discussing that, I want to say that we have our own conventional way of looking at aging, disease, and death. So that's why I added the term rethinking, and that too in 21st century. So the point that I want to make here is that how we can look at the whole process uh, in a very radical way, in unconventional way, and we could deconstruct the whole thing, and we could bring to surface whatever might not be visible very much, not in just in our society, but also in each and every walk of our life. So that is what it is. Then coming to English department, I thought that English department is not here just for talking about literature. English department is not an autonomously department. The point is that in 21st century, as departments, as disciplines, we stand in place with each other. So that is why we are placed as literature department in social science paradigm. So we are involving in this seminar not just the people of English department, but also the people of other departments, other disciplines. So we'll be talking about in this seminar, we'll be discussing and interacting the things not just from social science and also at the same time. We will be looking at how everything is represented in literature. So that is why we have just people not only from English department, but also from other uh, external. Professor Leslie Murray is there to discuss the whole thing during the pandemic time uh, from sociological angle. Professor Lynn Pierce will be there to discuss the representation of the same in literature, and Professor Anura Manatunga from Sri Lanka, who is from the Department of Archaeology, will speak this from Germany. So this is how we involve the things, we involve the people, we involve the systems, and that we will have to live. We just cannot be autonomous as English department. We have to work through all the disciplines, and that's our spirit. And with that spirit, we want to go ahead. So this is what I want to say.
Producer, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your for sharing your views with us. So now I request the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bodoland University, Professor Laisram Laddu Singh sir, to inaugurate the webinar by declaring it open and deliver the inaugural speech. Sir.
Uh, yeah, thank you, Dr. Putisa, and a very warm welcome to all the learned plenary session speakers, the chief guest, Professor J.N. Patil, my colleagues, Professor Patra, Director and Head of Department of English of Bodoland University, Dr. Rustam, Dr. Putisa, and all the colleagues from the Bodoland University, the participants from outside the Bodoland University, my dear students, ladies and gentlemen. Today, the English department is organizing 2 days international seminar on rethinking aging, disease and death in the 21st century. And I must say that The topic is something which is very close to my heart. This is some areas where I have been doing research from different perspectives. So I take this opportunity and also the permissions of all the resource persons, plenary session speakers to declare this international webinar on rethinking aging, disease and death in 21st century open. So now I take this opportunity to give the inaugural lectures pertaining to the theme of the webinar, and I will share my presentation. Whether my presentation is PPT is visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Visible,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Perfectly visible.
Okay. We all know that the world is aging, and here I am showing the growth in the percentage of population 60 years and above by region of the world and for some countries of the world. As we can see, Japan is the most aged populations. So by 2050, more than 40% of the population of Japan is expected to be above 60 years. And when it comes to India, we are still not that much aged population, though the proportion of the 60 plus population is fast increasing. But what matters for India is the absolute number. Though in terms of percentage, presently it is about 10%, and it is expected to cross 16% by 2050. But what matters, as I said, is the absolute numbers. India being the second most populous country in terms of the absolute number of elderly population, India also is gaining in number of elderly populations. Then after Japan, the next most aged population is the Sweden. And then the other countries, say if you look at the Asia in totality, by 2050, the proportion of 60 plus population is expected to be about 18%. So what causes the population aging, as all of us know, is the decline in the number of children born by the couple on the average, which is referred to as the total fertility rate in demography. And what I am showing is for India. Back in 1950, on the average, couples in India used to have more than six. Now, by 2045, we are expected to have less than 2 children per couple. That is, India is expected to reach below the replacement level uh, in 2045. Then another important factor is the increase in the life expectancy. The life expectancy of the country, it was hardly around 30 years in 1950. Now, in 2045, it is expected to reach 80. By now itself, for the women, the life expectancy has already crossed. Now, when we look at the population, the pyramids, uh, the population pyramid, the bottom bar represents the population under 19 years. And the middle green one represents the population in the working age groups, that is 20 to 59. And the top gray portion is the uh, elderly population, 60 years and above. As of now, our young population is very high, and the working age population is not that high, and the elderly population is also not that high. And the two vertical bars that is shown on the right side, one is the absolute number of population in these three age groups below 20 years, 20 to 59 years, and 60 plus. And the extreme right bars is the proportional share of these populations. Now we'll see how the age composition of India is changing because of the declining fertility and increasing in life expectancy. So now this is for the 2005 scenario. See, now this is for the, let us see, now we are in 2021. So now compared to the 2005, now in the 2021, what you see is that the bottom base started sinking. That is, the child population have started declining, and the middle green portion started bulging. That is showing the increasing population in the working age groups. This is what we are calling as the first demographic dividend. Along with that, the proportional share of the elderly population also is increasing. Now let us see what will happen in the 2030. You see, this is what is expected in the 2030. The base pyramid, that is the child population, further reduced. Now, still 32% of the populations are under 19 years, and 61% are in the 20 to 59 years, and the elderly population is 7.3%. Now let us see what will happen in 2050. See, now the elderly populations, both in absolute and proportional share, has increased. dramatically. So this is the absolute increase in millions, absolute increase in millions. So we are going to cross the 300 million mark in the 2050, and somewhere around 2040, the population of India is expected to overtake the population of China. So by around the first half of the 2040s, India is going to be the most populous country in the world. So now, what matters is not just looking at the 60 plus population share. So here, what I'm showing is over the years, how the 62, 69, 72, 79, 80 plus population would be increasing in India. Now, what happened is over a period of time, when the population become more and more aging, aged, the 60 plus population will start declining, and the 80 plus population, they will start increasing, and also the 70 to 79 populations. That means we are going to be super aged population in the course of time. So along with this, we are encountering the epidemiological transitions, that is the pattern of the morbidity, the diseases we are now tremendously transforming. See, this is for the 1995, 96. There are still many diseases which cannot be properly classified. There is the international classifications of the disease ICD-10. According to that classifications, this diagram is shown. Now you see here the diseases of the circulatory system will constitute 15% in 1995-96, and the diseases of the nervous system and the mental disorder, they are about 3%. Now we'll see, this is for the 1995-96. See, now the diseases of the nervous system has increased to 4% from 3%, and the mental disorder and behavioral disorder has increased, and the nutritional metabolism also has increased. And at the same time, the diseases which are not classified, their share has declined, and diseases of the respiratory system has increased to 13%. This is in the year 2004-5. Now in 2014 and 2045, and now you see the diseases of the nervous system is, their share is 6%, and the diseases of the circulatory system, just in a span of say 10 years, it has jumped from 13% to the 21%. Now, that is the epidemiological transitions. And if you look at age-wise, and here, of course, what I am showing is the disease pattern by age, and also making a comparison of the survivors when they are treated for the disease in the hospitals, and the dissidents, those who died in the hospital during the course of the treatment. Now you see, 40, 60 years and above, the non-communicable diseases, they are the predominant causes of the death. Among the deaths, the main causes of the death for population 60 years and above is the non-communicable diseases, which constitute 73% of the total deaths. And among the survivors also, 53% are due to the non-communicable diseases. And the share for the communicable diseases is very less. Among the dissidents, it is just 10%, and among the survivors, it's about 20%. That means, along with the epidemiological transitions and the rise in the 60 years populations, increasingly we are experiencing the burden of the non-communicable diseases. And this has led to a very high out-of-pocket expenditure, at least for India, because many households and many individuals do not have the health insurance, and the RSBI, Rashtriya Bima Suraksha Yojana, etc., that has just come into the existence. The implementations is not yet in the full swing, and it will take some years' time to gain momentum. Now, the out-of-pocket expenditures, is a mean out-of-pocket expenditures for the by year-wise, by age of the individual, and also for the dissidents and the survivors. You see, the yellow one is for the survivors, and the gray is for the dissidents. And now you see, for the 60 years and above, both the out-of-pocket expenditure for the survivors and also for the dissidents are very high, but it is much higher for the dissidents, which is above 10,000 as compared to 8,600 for the survivors. So this is the, again, by age-wise for the different period. And now what we see is that with the enhancing in the age, the mean out-of-pocket expenditure is increasing, and also over a period of time. This is again the similar situations for the survivors. Mean inpatient costs by age, 60 years and above, and 50 to 59 years and above over the years. This we have seen, it was increasing. And if you look at the causes of death, over the years, on the basis of the International Classification of Disease 10, what you see is that the circulatory system, the diseases of the circulatory systems, and even the diseases of the infectious nature, which can be cured, your share is very high. It is above around 20% of the total deaths are due to this. And similarly, the respiratory system it constitutes about 15%. Then this is again the causes of death, and we have just seen, if you see, this portion is increasing. This is due to the diseases of the circulatory system. Uh, among the total death, the death from these causes was 15% in 1995, and which has raised to 21% in 2045. Then again, these portions. This is the malignant neoplasm. The death due to the malignant neoplasm in the total death, the share has increased from 10% in 1995 to 16% in 2014-15. Now, all these out-of-pocket expenditures and the burden of the diseases with the increasing ages, who is supporting whom? That is what is meant. This is the family, that is the household, and the state, the government. The support comes from both the household and the state, both for the elderly and also for the young dependent. The socio-cultural norms govern the intra and inter household support system in the society. Traditional society like India, then the South Asian countries, they depend largely on the familial support system. It is the family, and at the same time, these norms, the social support system, familial support system, has made the society enabled to raise welfare of these children and the parents in particular, and the welfare of the society in general. And the government policy regulates the intergenerational distribution of the resources. The government collect taxes and they invest in earmark program, some for the old age security, some for the education of the children. So the government policy program, they play the intermediary role of the resource transfers from generations to generations, from one age group to the other age group, from the working population to the non-working and a dependent population. So, for instance, the children are incapable of caring for themselves during the formative stage of physical and mental maturations. So, the government programs and also the social support systems provide the caring for them. And those provisions may include the state welfare measures of the free primary educations, protecting the child marriage by enacting the Act of the minimum age of marriage, the SADA Act, and the prevention and the punishment of the child abuse, and the stringent laws for the abortion, and the stringent laws for divorce of parents with young children. And many times the parents are altruistic when it comes to investment for children. Parents, when they are working, they reduce their own consumption and they invest it for the education of the children, health care of the children, bringing up of the children. And the parents many times leave bequests to the children. This is how the society, it is the family and the state are playing a role for the support of these children, and the same principle apply for the support of the elderly. For instance, state implement is targeted policies for the welfare of the elderly, such as Indira Gandhi old age pension schemes, like that. And these norms, social norms, many times are unwritten convention, and it is a kind of contracts between the parents and the children. The parents who look after the children, they get reciprocal support from the children, grown-up children, when they become old. And now, the working populations, they are the sandwich generations because they support their parents and also their children. And they have the dual responsibility of bringing up of their own children and also supporting the parents. And at the same time, they have also to pay taxes to provide, to fund for the public policies. So in the economic life cycle of the individual, people enter into the working force after completing their educations in the late teens or the early 20s, and during the prime working age group, they build up their family, their house, educate their children, and at the same time they also plan for their own retirement by saving for retirement. So in the monetary terms, combining the expenditure and also the age pattern of the country, the dark black one, this is the monetary value of the consumption by people of all age, consumptions of all kinds, including healthcare, education, and then infrastructures, defense, everything. And the light blue, slightly bell-shaped graph is the income pattern. So during the young age and old age, people do not have income, so they consume more than what they have, they could earn, and it is only during the working age groups, their earning is more than what they directly consume for the healthcare, for the food, for housing. So this is this age group, this surplus will support the other dependent age groups in monetary value. So if we take the difference of the monetary value of the consumption and the income, so that is called the life cycle deficit. The life cycle deficits are very high for the children because they are consuming monetarily for all things without earning, and the same is true for the elderly population. This, the bottom portion is the surplus of the working age group. This working age group support the two dependent age groups. So now this support can be through the familial system, that is called a private transfer, or it could be through the government policies, that is taxing the people and investing in earmark public expenditures. This is for the familial. Now what we see here is that among the total familial support, monetary support, 41% of the support goes for the children under 19 years. Only 6.7% of the total familial support are benefited by the elderly population 65 and above. And who are the main contributor for this public support, a familial support system? So undoubtedly, it is the population in the working age group, that is 30 to 49. Their share of contribution in the familial support system is 53%. And at the same time, the elderly 65 and above, they also contribute in the familial support system, particularly for the education of their grandchildren. And this is the public support system. That means for the public earmark programs, for the children, for the middle age, for the elderly, who are the contributors and who are the beneficiaries. Again, of all the public support, monetary support, 35% of the total public resource for supporting it goes to the children under 19 years, and only 9.5% of the public support, monetary support, it is benefited by the elderly 65 years and above. And who are the main contributors? The main contributors are again the population in the prime working age group 30 to 49. And of course, some elderly, they do pay taxes and they also contribute 8.5% to the public transport system. So this is all the support system put together. So the graph below the x-axis, they are the providers, and a graph above the x-axis, they are the beneficiaries of all the support system. It is the familial support system and also the public support system. And now, if you see the green portion, that is through the familial support system. The benefit, major benefit of the familial support system, it goes to the children. Contrary to the belief that the elderly are supported by the family, the support of the elderly from the familial support is very, very nominal. And for the public, the biodate one, the benefit of the public program for supporting the elderly, they are also very, very meager. And then what makes the elderly keep alive? It is the asset-based reallocations. It is from their own saving and investment, and from their asset and properties who are supporting the elderly to live after 60 years of age. This is contrary to the belief that the elderly are being supported by the children. Now, when we look at the different Asian countries, so I am showing the life cycle deficit. So above the x-axis are the deficit, and below the x-axis are the surplus. When you look at the Japan, the life cycle deficit after 60 years is very high because the social security system is very strong, and they have a large chunk of the public funds are devoted for the social security and the health care of the elderly. they call the long-term healthcare policy of the elderly. And though Korea is also aging, it's not that aged population like the Japan, and also their public program or the social security program for the support of the elderly is not as strong as that of the Japan. Similarly, these are for the three Asian countries, India, Indonesia, and the Philippines. In these three countries, these three Asian countries, the public support system for the elderly are again not very strong. So you don't see much life cycle deficit like that of the Japan and Korea. And this is for China and Thailand, two countries which are of moderately aged population. Now, this is the interplay of the familial and the public support, and also the asset-based reallocations for 7 Asian countries. And I wanted to highlight the white one. This life cycle deficit, how much percentage of that life cycle deficit, that is the monetary value of the deficit of elderly, it is the white one, they are from the public transfer. And what you see is visible only in the case of Japan, China, and Korea. For the other countries, they are not visible. So for India, it is hardly 1.8% of the total life cycle deficit of the elderly are being funded by the public programs. And the same is for the Thailand, just about 2.3%. And then from where this is, as I said before, a large chunk is these asset-based reallocations. This saving of the asset have supported the elderly, 63% in the case of India, and 70% in the case of the Indonesia. Like that. So that means for caring of the elderly, monetary value, monetary terms for their healthcare, housing, everything. In the case of the countries where the social security and the public policy for pension and long-term healthcare is weak, the elderly are depending on their own resources after retirement. So post-2005, there has been some policy initiatives of the government of India under the National Rural Health Missions. It was a flagship program where various measures have been introduced. And after that, we have seen the geriatric care wards coming up in the public hospitals, but not in many. And in the AIMS also, they have set up a geriatric department separately to look after the healthcare needs of the elderly, because the healthcare of the need of the elderly, they are quite different from the healthcare need of the young population. So the government also have introduced policies and a program to protect the workers in the unorganized sectors. And we also have the employment generations programs like the MG Narega programs. So all these goes into the public program. But because of some noise is coming.
Somebody has unmuted by mistake. I request the
Yeah,
participants to please mute yourselves. Yeah, thank you.
yeah. Now it is okay. Now it is okay.
Yes, yes.
So yeah, because of this, the policy changes. How much is being uh, reflected in the uh, consumption support system of the elderly? And as for the elderly, not much has been changed. It has just improved from 6.5% to 7.1%. And of course, in terms of the earning, the elderly earning, it has increased from 2.2% to 4.9% in 2011-12. So this is the life cycle deficit by age over period of time, how much it is changing. For the elderly, there is a big increase in the deficit of the elderly, largely because the healthcare after 60 years is becoming more and more expensive. This is from the uh, public policies and program over the years, whether it is able to make any change. Not much. Marginal change are happening. This is for the this one. Of course, for the elderly, not much change, 7.1 and 8.3%. So other than these aspects of the elderly, and we have to look at the aging and the well-being of the society, and it has the various components like the activities of the daily life. Are they able to work themselves? Are they able to bath themselves, eat themselves, dress up themselves, and get on the bed themselves, get down from the bed themselves? These are daily activities. Their abilities to perform the daily activities adds to their well-being and their health. Whether their eyesight is proper, they have any disability, disease, any memory loss, those are. And above that, the social ties are also important. A large number of elderly are living by themselves, by alone, and few are living with their spouse, with their children, and many are living in the old age homes, that is with non-relatives. And many are not able to continue meeting their friends, relatives, and some are even abandoned. If you go to Banaras, there are uh, civil societies who have set up shelter for the abandoned elderly, particularly the women are abandoned in religious mela like the Kumbh Mela. And for the well-being, it is also important that they have a sound psychological uh, status. Many are depressed, many feel alone, sad, no desire to live, and the economic status also is dependent. And with the increasing age, of course, some elderly, they also feel that they have accomplished many things in their life. They are able to perform their social and economic responsibilities, and their all children are settled. They have built their own house. They have uh, made their own saving. So some elderly are feeling accomplished in their life. So all this totality counts to the well-being of the elderly. So I'm putting just for anyone interested, these are some of the references, mainly of my writings on the aging. But I know that this seminar is organized by the Department of English, mainly for the literature.
So, thank you so much, sir. Thank you for
Yeah,
appreciating our attempt at organizing the webinar. Thank you for sharing your research and knowledge and for the wonderful and informative presentation on aging. Thank you so much, sir. So,
Thank you.
so now I request Professor Zedin Patil, retired professor and dean, the English and Foreign Languages University, Hyderabad, to deliver your speech, sir, as the chief guest of the webinar.
Okay, Professor, thank you very much, and a very good morning to you, friends and colleagues and participants. Now, I'd like to share a few of my observations on this particular topic, and I think the topic is very significant, very important. All of us need to rethink what aging means and what decline means and what disease means and what death means to all of us. And in my opinion, the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us or has made us realize that we need to think about all these important issues in a broader and holistic perspective. Now, just imagine what would happen if we didn't die. You know, there are so many plants, so many trees, so many climbers, so many creepers, so many marine creatures and aerial creatures of birds. And, you know, there are billions and trillions and zillions of species of vegetation and animals in the universe. Now, what would happen if nobody, if nothing died? You know, just imagine. And, you know, we meet so many people every day, we read so many things every day, and we see, we hear, we know a lot of things. What would happen if we remembered everything that we hear, everything that we see, everything that we read, and so on and so forth? We would go crazy. So in my opinion, aging or decline and disease and death are blessings in disguise. They are not curses. Aging is not a curse, and death is not a curse. Probably disease can be described as a curse, but aging or declining and death are not, in my opinion, are not curses. So we can't remember everything. We shouldn't remember everything. Forgetting is a blessing in disguise. And, you know, for example, everybody is born, all of us are born, all of us are born in a society, all of us grow in a society, and we age in a society. We experience our declining years in a society, and some of us suffer from diseases, various kinds of diseases. And finally, all of us, whether we are human beings or lions or tigers or trees or marine creatures, all of us need to die and must die, and that is a very important fact of life. Now, as Shakespeare says, the world is a stage, and we have our own entries and exits, and between the entries and the exits, we play different roles. But birth and decay and death are essential realities of life. In Marathi, there is a poet called B.R. Tambe. And in one of his poems, he says, Maranat kharokar jagadagate. You know, because some people die, you know, the world continues. So this is a very paradoxical kind of perspective on death. So because we die, because old leaves, yellow leaves drop, new leaves, tender leaves, and green leaves are born. So remembering is a blessing, but forgetting is a greater blessing, right? So let me say a few things about immortality. You know, in literature, we have certain immortal characters. For example, in Indian literature, in Indian mythology, we have characters like Ashwatthama. Ashwatthama is cursed to live forever till the end of the time. So it's a curse. So we have Ashwatthama in Indian mythology. We have Tithonus. Tennyson, an English poet, has several poems to his credit, and one of his poems is called Tithonus. Tithonus also was immortal, and immortality turned out to be a curse for him. Right. Robert Herrick has a poem called To Daffodils. In that poem, Robert Herrick says, "Fair daffodils, we weep to see you haste away so soon." So a daffodil flower lives for a short time. There are daffodils and daffodils in Britain, but the life of daffodil flowers is very short, very brief. Similarly, human life is very short, human life is very brief. Now, just the other day, I was listening to Sadhguru, and Sadhguru narrated the story of Alexander the Great. I don't know whether this is a fact or an anecdote. I suppose it's an anecdote. And Alexander the Great was a ruthless killer. He killed people. He killed and killed and killed people one after the other. He killed even his own soldiers, right, to set an example so that nobody acted. So, Alexander came to a yogi in India and he said he wanted to be an immortal person. And the rishi, the saint, gave him some advice, and he went to a crystal pond of water. And the rishi had told him that if he drank that water, if he sipped that water, he would become immortal. But just as he was going to drink that water, which was said to make people immortal, the water dropped because he saw a crow standing in the water, and the crow said to him, "Stop! Don't drink this water. I drank this water, crystal clear water, millions of years ago, and now I want to die, but I can't die. Would you like to be immortal like me and suffer forever?" And then Alexander the Great thought for a moment, and he said, "No, no, no, no. I don't want to drink this water because I don't want to become an immortal human being. Because you say that you drank this water millions of years ago and you became immortal. So if this is the reality, if immortality leads to suffering and so many other curses, then I would not like to drink this water. I would not like to become immortal." So that is the tale, that is the story of Alexander the Great. All of us know that Gautam Buddha saw 3 scenes, in fact, 4 scenes. And he changed his mind, and then he was enlightened. He saw an old man suffering there. He saw a diseased man suffering again. And he saw a funeral procession, a corpse, a dead body. And finally, he saw a monk sitting under a tree and meditating. And then he decided to follow the monk. He decided to sit under a tree and meditate and get enlightenment. So, old people, diseased people, dead people, these are examples of certain realities of life, and we need to accept these realities of life. Now, when we talk about disease, we can think of disease in 2 ways, or in 2 categories, under 2 categories. One is physiological or bodily diseases. The other one is psychological diseases. Let me cite some examples from literature. Shakespeare wrote several plays, and some of his main characters, some of his heroes and heroines were mentally diseased. For example, Lady Macbeth propelled her husband Macbeth to kill the king, and the king's name was Duncan. Now, Duncan had come to stay for a day with Macbeth in Macbeth's palace, in Macbeth's fort or castle. So he was a guest and he was a king. Is it a good idea to kill a guest? Do we kill our guests? Do we kill our kings or ministers or chief ministers and prime ministers? No, we don't. So they committed that sin because they were mentally diseased. And Hitler was equally diseased, mentally diseased. And we have a character called Shylock in The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. He is also mentally diseased. So disease can be described or discussed with reference to physiological or bodily diseases and psychological or mental diseases. Right. Now, Santa Ganeshwar in Maharashtra decided to die. It was not a suicide, He thought that his mission had been achieved, and therefore he didn't see any sense in continuing living the life that he was supposed to live. So he went into the samadhi and, he ended his life. So, there are different perspectives of looking at death and disease and decline and disease and death, right? So there are some poets who challenged it. For example, John Donne, who was a metaphysical poet, in one of his poems called Death Be Not Proud, says, "Oh, death, you can't kill me. You are no superior to sleep. You are not superior to sleep and rest. You are another variety of sleep and another variety of rest. So I don't care, and I'm not afraid of you. You will die one day. Oh, death, you will die. I will not die." So people can look at phenomena like decline and disease and death differently, right? So there are a lot of things that we can say about decline and decline in the sense aging. I think a better title for this theme would be decline, disease, and death. All the three words begin with the letter D. So decline, disease, and death. So we can think about decline, we can think about diseases, we can think about death from different angles, different perspectives. And, I would like to end my very brief talk with what is said in the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, there is a shlok, and it goes like this: Nainam chandanti shastrani. We are not only bodies, we are bodies and souls, bodies and minds, bodies and spirits. So in that context, the Gita says, Nainam chandanti shastrani. Shastra means weapon. Weapons cannot cut the soul. Weapons cannot injure, wound the soul. The soul is immortal. The body is mortal. We change our bodies like we change our clothes. That's the assumption. So, Nainam chindanti shastrani. Weapons cannot cut the soul into pieces, cannot injure it. Nainam dahati pavakaha. Fire cannot burn the soul. Weapons cannot cut the soul or kill the soul. Fire cannot burn the soul. Nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha. Na chainam kledayantyapo, na shosheti marutaha. Water cannot drench it. Water cannot make it wet. And wind cannot dry it. So we are not only bodies, we are bodies and souls. The body is born. The body ages. The body declines. And the body succumbs to certain diseases, right? The body is susceptible to diseases. And finally, the body dies and decomposes. And we talk about 5 elements like water, earth, fire, sky, and so on, and air. So there are 5 elements in the body, and all these elements go back to the original elements when we die. So, nainam chindanti shastrani, nainam dahati pavakaha. Weapons cannot cut the soul. Weapons cannot burn the soul. Nachainam kledayantyapo. Water cannot make the soul wet. Water cannot drench the soul. Na shosheti marutaha. Marut means wind. Wind cannot dry the soul. The soul is immortal, right? So with this, I'd like to end my short speech. In fact, I wanted to say so many things, but since our time is very short and since we are running short of time, I'd like to stop now. Thank you very much, Professor Patra and Professor Wisdom and Professor.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
I wish I could say whatever I wanted to say, but since our time is very short, I need to say. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much for that wonderful speech, and especially from talking, from the perspective of literature. So thank you for that. We are also highly honored to have Professor Jiblal Sapkota from Nepal and Professor MS Hussain from Bangladesh, who have joined the inaugural session. We would have liked to hear from them, but due to paucity of time, we will not be able to do that. So we apologize for that. Now I request my colleague, Dr. Rustam Brahma, to propose the vote of thanks and conclude the inaugural ceremony.
Okay, thank you, Producer. Am I audible, Producer?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, very good morning to all of you. So this is my privilege to propose a vote of thanks of this two-day international webinar on rethinking aging, the disease, and that. So first of all, I'd like to thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Laishram Laddu Singh, for his kind consent to inaugurate the program today, webinar program, and his enthusiasm to present or share his research informations or certain kinds of research activities on this particular field. So I express my thankfulness and gratitude to Professor Laishram Laddu Singh, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Then I like to express our thankfulness and gratitude to Professor Jumbarlal Patil, sir, for his kind consent to be a chief guest of this particular inaugural session and to deliver a speech. So thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir. So you are always with us. So today also you have become a part of this two-day international program despite your busy schedule. So we are highly thankful to you, sir. Highly grateful to you. Then I also like to express our heartful thankfulness and gratitude to all the resource persons, plenary speakers, as well as the chairpersons who have consented to speak or to give a talk on this particular two-day international webinar, and those chairpersons who have given their kind consent to share the plenary session. So we express our thankfulness and gratitude to all the resource persons and chairpersons. I also thank all the academics, researchers who have participated or who have been kind enough to participate in these inaugural sessions of two-day international webinar, who have attended from different institutions, universities, colleges. So I am very thankful to them. We express our gratitude and thankfulness to all of the academics or the researchers who have attended this inaugural session. And I also thank all the participants who are showing interest to participate in this particular two-day webinar. And I also thank the head of the department and the rector of Butler University, Professor Pradip Kumar Patro, who is the main backbone of or main pillar of this particular two-day international webinar, developing of the concept note of this particular webinar, as well as arranging all the renowned resource persons from the nations and outside the nations to make says, and sir has been in the has been keeping the food source. Sir has been the source of inspirations to keep pushing us to organize this particular webinar and make it successful. So we are highly thankful to you, sir. So we expressed the being the on behalf of the organizing teams or the conveners, I would like to express our heartfelt thankfulness and gratitude to Professor Pradip Kumar Patra, sir. Then I also express our gratitude and thankfulness to all the colleagues who have presented or who are present in this particular inaugural session. And so once again, I thank you all the presentees in this particular two-day webinar with the hope of grand success of this two-day international webinar. So now I request our co-convener, Dr. Professor Bhumik. So I also thank her for anchoring this particular program, and I request her to go ahead with the next agenda. Thank you, Professor.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you for doing that. So now we move on to the first plenary session. So I welcome you all to the first plenary talk of the webinar on rethinking aging, disease, and death in the 21st century. The first plenary talk will be delivered by Professor Nandana Dhakta, and the session will be chaired by Dr. P.C. Dugar. Before I hand over the session to the Honorable Chair, let me give a brief introduction of our plenary speaker and the chairperson of this session. I feel humbled and privileged to introduce our plenary speaker, Professor Nandana Dhakta, and feel proud to be one of her students. Professor Nandana Dhakta is Professor of English at Gauhati University, Assam, India. Her areas of work include Assam and modernity, English literature, American studies, women's studies, and the politics of representations. She has published numerous essays in journals such as Global South, Journeys, Interventions, Journal of Contemporary Thought, Journal of Creative Communication, Seminar, and Australian Literary Studies, besides contributing essays to edited collections on Assam, identity, and violence. She is also the author of books like Questions of Identity, Location, Migration, Hybridity in Assam, published by Sage in the year 2012. Then American Literature, Literary Contexts, published by Orient Black Swan in the year 2016. She is also the editor of books like Communities of Women in Assam, Being, Doing, and Thinking Together, published by Routledge in the year 2017, and another of her book, English Teachers' Accounts, Essays on the Teacher, the Text, and the Indian Classroom, her recent book, which got published this year by Routledge. We heartily welcome you, madam. And our respected chairperson is Dr. Paritosh Chandra Dugar. He is retired principal, postgraduate government college, Udaipur, Rajasthan. Apart from various publications to his credit, Dr. Dugar is an internationally published writer of flash fiction and a winner in international flash fiction writing competitions. Um, uh, yeah, recently 7 of his flash fictions have been included in the syllabus of the prestigious Sangameshwar Autonomous College of Solapur, Maharashtra. So I welcome both of you, and sir, I hand over the session to you. Thank you, sir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Good morning to everyone, and thank you, Dr. Pratusha, for introducing me and the plenary speaker, Professor Nandana Dhakta, to the audience. And now, without wasting more time, I would like to invite the plenary speaker, Dr. Professor Nandana Dhakta, to deliver her lecture.
Thank you, Professor Dugar. And I'd like to congratulate the Department of English, Boroland University, for organizing what is evidently a very important seminar. And can you hear me, Pratusha? Am I audible? I'm going to turn off
Yes,
my
ma'am.
video so that
Perfectly audible.
we have no interference.
Okay, ma'am.
You're audible.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
So this is a very important seminar, and though I'm not an expert in this area, and I'm going to essentially be speaking from two subject positions. One is that of a literature person, someone who has taught and read literature for many, many years, and the other is of a literature person encountering age in oneself and in other people, and reflecting on all this. So this is going to be partially a sort of half memoir, half reflection kind of paper. And I'd like to begin by a number of literary references which have been floating in my mind as I thought about this seminar. As I started reading and thinking for this talk, and my talk is titled Decline, Wisdom and Difference, Changing the Narrative of Aging. I used a number of words in the title which I sort of used as markers to think about the area. And as I started reading and thinking, snatches of poetry and images of old age from fiction and drama kept floating about in my mind. The first one which came, of course, was from a poem we used to learn in school. Here, where policy shakes a few sad last grey hairs, lines from Ode to Nightingale by Keats. Then, of course, Yeats, who has written so much on old age, that is no country for old men. And he goes on to say, an aged man is but a paltry thing, a tattered coat upon a stick, unless soul clap its hands and sing, and louder sing, for every tatter in its mortal dress. So very interesting combination of decline, aging, and an aspiration towards immortality, as Professor Patil was saying. And of course, when you're old and grey and nodding by the fire, so an image of a passive, declining, helpless old age in his poem to Maud Gonne. And then there are those lines of exhortation from Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage against the dying of the night. So there are these two themes which you will notice here. Decline, certainly, and a corresponding rage which is there, which is invited. And by rage, I think this is a term which is going to move through my paper as I talk about rage, madness, dementia. These are ideas I'll be working with. There are also the grand old men from the epics, and always it is the men, and only a few women, a few witches and crones and hags who represent old womanhood, wise white-bearded wizards and magicians, Bhishma and Drona, but also the over-fond Dhritarashtra, scheming and helpless at the same time, and the robust, angry or benign old rishis. In folk and fairy tale, in children's literature, the old and benign or the old and evil feature. They feature in the titles of collections like Buriyar Khadu from Assam and Thakurma Jhuli from Bengal. And certainly in the modern literature, I'm thinking of modern as early modern to the present, a Lear and an old Duncan, the fisherman Santiago from Hemingway's The Old Man and the Sea, and the ghostly Miss Havisham. Recently, I also purchased a book by Arun Shourie called Waiting for Death. I haven't yet got into the book, but these are some of the concerns that are there around us. And as one ages oneself, I have about 4 years to go for retirement. So as one ages, one actually begins to notice that these were always there. These are books that have been around, other books that one has not paid that much attention to. Suddenly I recall Ghosh's last image of old love in the Glass Palace, for instance. So this is not strictly doing literary criticism here. I'm not going to be doing readings of poems or interpretations of representations of old age in poems, but I want to use the sensibility that has been created by literature in those who do literature, those who read literature, those who engage with literature, the sensibility to address the thinking on aging in contemporary India. I'm looking at this presentation as a kind of memoir, a personal witness, primarily talking about my own experience of watching people aging, watching loved ones aging, and at the same time, thinking about aging as a cultural phenomenon, especially with the development of the field of gerontology. One sees that the cultural implications of age are so very important to understand, and the evolution of this as a disciplinary field, aging studies as a interdisciplinary field, is a very, very important aspect of how we need to study age. So I'm really, trying to suggest here that aging is one area, like, gender or weakness of some kind, marginality, otherness. These are areas that demand multidisciplinary approaches, multidisciplinary engagements, and interactions amongst all these disciplines. And it's very interesting that we began the talk with this statistical presentation where we got so much information about the status of the elderly in India. So I have all of this in my mind as I move through this paper, and the primary focus of this paper is going to come towards the end, where I want to bring together the idea of difference, which is going to run through the paper, and decline wisdom and what it means to move into something other than decline wisdom and, you know, normal stereotypes about aging. So I also mentioned the narrative of aging. I'm talking about changing the narrative of aging. I'll dwell a little on these points at a little later point in the paper. So the interface of literature, and we have, you know, crusty Socrates, the revered Tagore, thinkers and creators who sustain their creativity into great old age. So all these literary examples represent a cross-section of age representations, age and creativity, the aged as benevolent guides to those younger to them who follow in their wakes, and aging as something that needs to be considered for more than illness, ailment, disease, decline. You know, we need to look at age as having much more than that. So the interface of literature and gerontology has yielded a number of useful pointers for considering age. Literature offers case studies, contextualizes and particularizes the problems of gerontology. It provides a laboratory for the study of aging. If we look at a couple of representations of age, these aspects of the relationship become evident. I just briefly mentioned two novels here. In Doris Lessing's The Diaries of Jana Somers, we have a relationship between a middle-aged Jana and the 90-year-old Maudie Fowler she's looking after. Lessing has Jana put herself in Maudie's place, in fact into her consciousness, and imagines her daily struggle to get through the day, the frail body a major obstacle. Lessing also depicts the humiliation of Maudie as she has to be washed by Jana after she soils herself. Now, these novels and several others are discussed in a paper in the collection on the Handbook of Aging Studies. It's available online. There's another novel which is mentioned here. In May Sarton's As We Are Now, Caro Spencer is in a nursing home that she calls a concentration camp for the old. Caro insists, I am not mad, only old. So what literature here is doing, and you know, when we are thinking of this opposition between madness and old age here, I'm reminded of a very famous poem. I think all of you would have done it at some stage in your literary studies or literary careers, and may have even read it otherwise. This is Emily Dickinson's Much Madness is Divinest Sense. She's not talking of age, but she's talking of a condition which I would like to align with the sense of difference that I want to work through here. She says, much madness is divinest sense to a discerning eye. Much sense, the starkest madness. 'Tis the majority in this as all prevail. Assent, and you are sane. Demur, you're straightway dangerous and handled with a chain. So this is how we deal with difference, with things that don't agree with us, or with our conceptions about how things should be, the normative, which is such an important part of how we live our lives and organize our societies. So this idea of not being mad, but merely old, this is very important to keep in mind. So the literary imagination's capacity for empathizing with characters here gives us the perspective of the two elderly women. New terms have emerged because of literature's engagements, and a couple of interesting words have come into the field. One is Constant Rook's idea of the Vollendangsroman, or a story of winding up. We know the Bildungsroman. We do so much about the Bildungsroman and story of growing up or coming of age. But here you have winding up stories, which are called Vollendungsroman, and Reifungsroman, which is a novel or story of ripening. So story is written by elderly people about what it means to age and ripen, echo from Lear as well. So this brings up the problem of who narrates, what is narrated, and how. Epistemological questions that embody ethical issues. And I'm moving here out of literature slightly and trying to consider that when we do interviews, when we do studies of elderly people in homes, nursing homes, in families, or in whatever situation they are in, we appear as their mouthpieces. We listen to them, or maybe we see them, we observe them, and we write accounts of how they are. So here I would want to introduce another little thing which will be a kind of subtext in my paper. The problem of who narrates, what is narrated, and how. Questions, epistemological questions that embody ethical issues. First-person narratives, representations of the elderly in their own voice, but also third-person narratives, Alzheimer's narratives, caregiver narratives, narratives of dementia, or fictional representations of the elderly. These raise issues about the access a narrator has to the mind of the elderly. The representation by another of the life of an elderly person, just a sec, too many pages is, would give rise to questions about violation and interference unless we can rethink the idea of individualism at work here. What is the nature of the individual as the aged person? So I'm going to consider that as well at one point later in the paper. So what is the idea of individual here? The assumption of a separate, sacrosanct selfhood of each individual. Is that at work, or have we in fact forgotten this idea of the sacred nature of each person and have, normatively included the person within certain discourses with which we find it convenient to deal with him? Generally, the kind of images we see in the text mentioned fall roughly into two categories. Age as a period of decline marked by increasing passivity, or its opposite, a state of rage and frustration, and age as a condition of wisdom, immortality, creativity, growth. These representations are there. So such representations have also been responsible for the construction of old age subjectivity or selfhood, elaborated and detailed into judgments about what can and cannot be done. I remember my mother at one point, when she was maybe about 55 or so, she would say that, no, I won't wear this colored sari, this colorful sari, because my sisters will say that at your age, you should not be wearing this. So these ideas which they sound very innocuous, but they tend to create and they accumulate and create a narrative about age with which people conduct themselves or raise expectations about being conducted. So the pathetic, the elaborated and detailed into judgments about what can and cannot be done, the pathetic being associated with both passivity and rage. Its opposite has been characterized as retaining or achieving ability to continue to do certain things, maintain the body with the goal of youthfulness and strength. Again, a very important part of the commodified culture in which we live in. Cultural critics working on aging have recognized and proposed different kinds of alternatives to these ways of being. Lynn Sandberg points out that discourses on old age and aging are framed in narrow and binary ways, either as a decline narrative or through discourses of positive and successful aging. And she offers affirmative old age as an alternative conceptualization of old age that aims to acknowledge the material specificities of the aging body in terms of difference, but without understanding it as a body marked by decline, lack, or negation. And this is another point that I will come to because of what I've said in the title. It feeds into what I will say there. Difference is an alternative to entrenched images and ideas. A seeking after alternative ways to age, to continue to do things, or to find newer things to do that are suitable for ability and resources. However, even assumptions of difference may in fact have questionable implications. The Journal of Aging Studies some time back carried an article where the author expresses reservations about seeing old age as different. She wrote, though certainly often unintended, the appreciation of old age as being positively different from midlife ends up with sheltering old people as the others from the imposition of active society, and instead argued for a way to overcome the fruitless dichotomy of imperialism, sameness, they have to be like us, and difference, they are the others, or they are different from us. This is certainly an issue, but if the word can be used in another way, to suggest the acceptance of old age as a stage or different time of life that needs attention and time to be given to it in ways that are more intensive and specific to the needs of old age. So this attention is not only to the care of the physical body, to the food they will eat, to protection of their physical being, and keeping them from risks and crime, being attacked by criminals, or there can be any number of such situations. What we need to do is pay attention to how this aging is reflected in the way the person perceives himself or herself, and whether we can connect to that self-perception, help that self-perception to remain as long as it can. A positive othering is perhaps what is necessary. If othering is a process that alienates and erases, it can also be a process that acknowledges the other's needs. So the other doesn't have to be someone we marginalize, we categorize as something that is different, inferior, someone you don't have to come close to and keep separate, keep away. What we do today with regard to gender, race, and other life forms in cultural studies and all other disciplines must also be done with respect to the aged. Give it visibility and notice, and factor it into the mainstream policy and action. And I'm mentioning policy here. Again, I'll come back briefly at the end to this, primarily because I think I saw it somewhere in the note for your seminar. I have a second section here. The first part, of course, was literary narrative preliminaries. In this second section, I'm mulling over the idea of why my talk is in the form of a partially a memoir, because as I wrote this, as I was thinking of this, and even as I read certain things here, I'm remembering examples from the life of my parents, from the life of their siblings, people I have watched aging and have, heard, conversed with, spent time with, and have thought about so much really. So it's in the form of a memoir that reflects on age through my own experience of being with my parents, but also now an individual and collective experience of aging. I find that, when we meet my friends, my school friends, we have a very vibrant group of old school friends. So all of us, we talk about aging all the time. It's a very prominent thing amongst us. How we are going to age, what we will do when we age, how many times we're going to meet, and so on and so forth. So it's also all of this. It is about medical and cultural discourses that folded into our lives as we dealt with aging bodies and still alert minds, as we were dealing with my parents, for example, and tried to cope with words and narratives that would hem them in within normative medical or cultural frames. And you'll see why I say this in the third section. It is a tribute to age and to all that it means to not only go through it, but to be alongside it and see it as a beautiful stage and aspect of life, to be valued for what it has and not to be devalued for what it hasn't. It is with this sense that I use the three words in my title: decline, wisdom, and difference, words embodying ideas with which aging is approached in different cultures and that are also part of the way we study age, especially within the difference perspective that is now fairly common in aging studies. There's a great deal of work in the developed world on gerontology, and we have fields like critical gerontology, cultural gerontology, narrative gerontology, literary gerontology, or you can see what they would mean. It's also a recognition of the support structure that keeps age from degenerating into a period of toleration and waiting, a hidden subtext of many care situations. So I'm seeing this discourse that has been created around this discipline or field of aging studies as being a very, very important part of, what shall I say, a support system, a way of thinking that we hope will change the way we perceive old people and the way we make situations comfortable for them to live lives which still carry a degree of dignity. So what does it entail to keep age beautiful and welcome for the one who ages and for those who provide support? Why is it that aging is more and more becoming synonymous with dementia, a word I have particular abhorrence for and will discuss in a while? Why is it that cultural construction inevitably ends up becoming universalizing and homogenizing, evolving words and terms and ideas that prevent the perception of difference even as they appear to work with it. And I'm particularly thinking of medical discourse and the very common use of words like dementia to categorize different kinds of situations through which old people go. Confusion, for example, uh, electrolyte imbalance, infections, these all cause temporary imbalance of mind. They are not all dementia. But so often the word dementia, the way it has entered into our social discourse, into our contemporary social conversation, everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about it, perhaps without realizing that this is a word which is very hurtful, which is very, it's pejorative, and it has, in a way, uh, dehumanized a certain element of our population. So the second part of my title has an assumption and an intention. It assumes that narrative, the mode with which most of us literary workers are equipped, the telling of the story of age, the stories of aging, reveals, aids understanding, and as many literary gerontologists believe, helps construct a cultural history of aging. Aging is a given in many different ways. Medical science accepts it and treats the malfunctioning aging body, but also generates a narrative that has various kinds of effects. It can lead to a depressive fatalism, to popularizing certain terms that attach to people, and that can actually aggravate conditions through the adoption and deployment of certain kinds of attitudes and responses. Overly cautious, performatively protective. You show, I recall how annoyed my mother used to be. She was frail, she had osteoporosis, but she was a very independent old lady, a very little old lady, as osteoporosis, shrunk her frame. She used to be very annoyed if anyone tried to hold her hand and help her walk when she could well do it herself, even if not as fast as the rest of the people. So old age tends to be homogenized and sometimes even naturalized within terms like geriatrics or gerontology, though certainly often unintended. The appreciation of old age as being positively different from midlife ends up with sheltering old people as the others from the impositions of active society. So much of the work on aging comes from the north, especially cultural gerontology. But if you look at what work is being done in India, and I must admit, not a very detailed search. But as I searched, I realized that the social sciences were certainly doing work. We saw statistical work on aging at the start, but the cultural study of aging and study of all the literature that we have where aging features, this is not a very big body of work yet. Perceptions of aging in India today are set alongside higher life expectancy, a young population, nuclear families, children leaving home and settling abroad, the rise of cases of dementia and Alzheimer's. This is the situation against which we can see the narrative of age changing, the greater efforts to stay young through lifestyle changes, the rise of older living conditions, and use of medical solutions to keep off processes associated with aging, treating confusion, the physical on the one hand and the mental on the other. This is also perhaps what might account for the paucity of studies of aging that look beyond statistics or address questions of risks and falls, problems of aged parents and children abroad. I'm summarizing papers I came across online, or gendered nutritional aspects, medical care for the elderly, crimes against the elderly, abuse and neglect. The cultural aspect of it is fairly thin. There are some literary studies. Pramod Nair, for example, has written an essay on dementia in recent Indian English fiction and has a forthcoming book on Alzheimer's narratives. These are themselves many and varied and come from all our languages. We have cultural texts in these languages, in many of our languages, but not many of these have entered into what we might call aging studies for India. The resources of literature in opening up the narrative of aging is still work that needs to be done. Many of these things are taken for granted and adopted unquestioningly from the critical literature on gerontology available to us. So I come to my third section and final section, changing the narrative. What do I mean when I say changing the narrative of aging? In changing the narrative, I believe we need to do a number of things. understand the idea of narrative impact and not just narrative as cultural construction. Acknowledge, number two, acknowledge aloneness and isolation as aspects of the condition of aging, mentally alone, when they're in dementia, states of dementia. We all understand that in so many homes, I have seen old parents living in flats with children, isolated in one room. Nobody goes into the room. They are completely by themselves. They might come out briefly, but they go back to that room. So that kind of isolation, isolated in the midst of a family. So we need to acknowledge these and pay attention to the kind of words used to refer to aging in its many dimensions. For me, this is a starting point to shift the conversation and thinking on aging. Narrative, to take the first one first, narrative has been understood in certain ways, but how a narrative gets into circulation and becomes part of everyday conversation so that one inhabits such narrative unthinkingly. This is especially true of how we think and discuss aging and the elderly as both a general category and as specific elderly persons. The same narrative applies. This is where the story, individual narrative accounts, personal witness, but also the prospective individual case that is not yet narrated becomes an important addition. Those of us who do literature, of course, know a great deal about narrative and the importance of narrative. Narrative is not just something that we study in literary texts, it is also following the work of people like Michel Foucault, for example. You have so much being attributed to the ideological weight of narrative, what it can do when it becomes a body of statements or a body of thinking, a story being told in a certain way that can circulate, that can be taken on, that can be taught to people. So these are ways in which narrative, a story about a people, a country, a population, the aged, that can work. So I'm thinking of narrative in this sense, that a narrative change is what is needed. When we talk about old age, what are we really talking about? Isolation of the aged, it's so important to notice and address this. Think of the binary that came up during the pandemic and its effects on the elderly in the Euro-American and Australian care centers and retirement homes and in Indian society. There was I recall many discussions online where they were talking about how more elderly people were dying in the West because they were in homes and in retirement homes and such places, but fewer older people were dying in India. Now this, to me, was a very complacent kind of argument that we are so happy with the way we are treating our old people. We really shouldn't be, because that really was not the case. They were at home because they were isolated and they didn't catch the disease, but that is not to say that they were in optimum living conditions. So while this may have been true at one point for any number of reasons, the reality of such existence, being isolated in the bosom of a family, reveals a very different picture. So isolation in general is not confined to this or that culture. It is common and often ignored. And this compels us to pause and wonder about the nature of individuality and relationships. So what is this individual that we need to work on? What idea of individuality do we need to address or keep in mind as we think about aging here? Judith Butler, one of my favorite writers and philosophers, in an interview given to the New Yorker on February 9, 2020, following the publication of her book, The Force of Nonviolence, clarified what it means to be an individual. In answer to a question from the interviewer on the individual as independent, she said, that model of the individual is comic in a way, but also lethal. So the individual as independence is a comic formulation for her. It's lethal. The goal is to overcome the formative and dependent stages of life to emerge separate and individuate. And then you become this self-standing individual who she finds comic. But who actually stands on their own, she asks. We are all, if we stand, supported by any number of things. Even coming to see you today, she says to the interviewer, the pavement allowed me to move, and so did my shoes, my orthotics, and the long hours spent by my physical therapist. His labor is in my walk as it were. I wouldn't have been able to get here without any of those wonderful technologies and supporting relations. So we are all dependent. That is the point she's making here in this interview, that we cannot think about ourselves as separate, sacrosanct individuals, because interdependence is a condition of our being in society. Acknowledging dependency as a condition of who any of us happens to be is difficult enough, but the larger task is to affirm social and ecological interdependence. This is still Butler. If we were to rethink ourselves as social creatures who are fundamentally dependent upon one another, and there's no shame, no humiliation, no feminization in that, I think we would treat each other differently, because our very conception of self would not be defined by individual self-interest. I find this it's a very profound statement. It's also a very radical statement in a way, because it's inviting us to think about ourselves no longer as separate and individual, but as being connected to so many people and things in the world around us. So this suggests a fundamental conceptual change. And once we recognize that we are all dependent on one another, this would take the aged individual within its purview. Put her or him. Are we not dependent on the aged individual emotionally for memories? So put her or him on the same footing as every other individual of all sexes, young, middle-aged, ethnically and racially different, and on the differential support structures that all of these categories need. The third point I had in mind, I'm taking sips of coffee, so please excuse the small breaks. The third point I have in mind is the circulation of certain words and terms that attach to the elderly and can influence both the elderly and those around. Let me take an extreme example for this. The word dementia is now one of the most wildly and carelessly used words in circulation. You will hear it in hospitals and nursing homes and clinics. You will hear it among the young and middle-aged speaking of the old, and you're likely to find tons of writing on it in medical journals and in the field of cultural gerontology. As I searched for aging and literature, I kept running up against articles on dementia. The first time I really paid attention to the word was when my parents reached their 80s. They passed away in the last decade. One day, a ceramic plate fell on my mother's toe. It caused some soreness and pain that stayed for a few days. But by the evening, she had forgotten what it was that had caused the injury. So the pain was there, but she couldn't remember what had fallen. We consulted a doctor about this sudden forgetfulness and were told it could be the onset of dementia. But he prescribed a number of medicines that she took first for a few months and then for a couple of years. During this time, she had 2 episodes of getting up and walking about in some confusion during the night. This was in a period of 3 months or so. These didn't recur, and we could see no signs of further degeneration in cognition. In fact, she was herself convinced that the medicines were working, would take them herself, run the household, organize meals, and cook at least one dish every day. The physical frailty increased, but she didn't become a significantly different person or lose her memory. My father similarly was given this label when we took him for treatment for a spinal collapse that left him bedridden for a few months before his death. By now, we had begun to read up about these age-related conditions that could cause confusion. Electrolyte imbalance, an infection, a sudden traumatic event, in this case, the collapse. These were periodic problems that caused temporary cognitive impairment, but in the intervals between, my father was a jolly, laughing person who had many visitors. Some of my students came often, an incredibly young woman as an attendant, and 2 physiotherapists. The days were full. He talked and reminisced, taught his attendant arithmetic and spelling, was contemptuous of the garden I was attending in his absence. So today I find this very amusing. So did he have dementia? I mean, this is what, I've been mulling over this. Could he have had merely a phase of disorientation because of that trauma? So what both these experiences taught me was the need to attend to the different ways in which people age. and adapt one's responses as caregivers and attendants to the ways in which the changes that might look alarming can actually be simply logical extensions of the person's temperament and character. The term dementia offended me. I don't know how it affects all those who hear it, but its effect is an important aspect of the way we narrate these aging stories. So I'm pulling together difference, narrative, the words we use in order to think about how we can have a change in this conversation. So when I looked up the word dementia in those early days, wondering what aspect of it defined the aged, I came across this set of synonyms: brain sickness, craziness, insaneness or insanity, lunacy, madness, mental illness, psychopathy, imbalance. For me, these were a horrific sign of the cruelty of words. Butler, again, she has a wonderful book on this, and their capacity to hurt when used by another, about another person. Interestingly, as I wondered how the medical community itself felt about this word, I came across a viewpoint piece in the Journal of Cellular and Molecular Biology. And it's so interesting that this is such an interdisciplinary field. This was in 2010. It was titled, "Should the Word Dementia Be Forgotten?" The author recounts the experience of a caregiver of a female patient with progressive cognitive impairment due to a neurodegenerative disorder, and the physician, a professor of geriatric medicine and leading researcher in these kinds of diseases, who presented a rationale for elimination of the pejorative and harmful word, I'm quoting from the essay, dementia, widely used in medicine and science and in universal use today. They offered a more meaningful and non-stigmatizing terminology, a change from frontotemporal dementia to frontotemporal disease. So it's not as if this conversation is not changing, it's not as if people are not aware of it, but it is still a very small, a little narrative, if you like, a small voice. This represents the kind of change I refer to in the title, a narrative, rhetorical change in the way we speak about age, tell stories of aging, attend to the aged, or discuss medical remedies. It is so necessary to attend to the particular, the specifics of a personality. How is it that a child forgets so comprehensively the unique character of a parent and instead responds from the perspective of a word? This is where literature makes its contribution, the attention to words and stories about people, how the aged are represented and described, but more importantly, perhaps the empathy and psychological insight it teaches, and the openness and understanding it teaches us to bring to characters, opens up the possibility of changing the narrative and influence its use in the wider society, and bring such narratives into common currency. This is where I'm saying that the narrative, this change narrative has to enter conversations about aging. It has to enter the narrative of aging prevalent in a society, circulating in a society. Pratusha, if I have just 5 minutes more, I'd like to sum up here. Finally, therefore, I would
Yes,
like to return 5 minutes.
yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
I would like to return to the idea of difference which I flagged in the title and which undergirds my thinking on your conference topic. The 21st century is a marker or signpost, and its many challenges to the elderly population makes me want to consider it as an idea that might be seen to reconstitute otherness. And not in the sense that it constitutes otherness, but not as an attribute of the object or target, but as a method of thinking on the part of the subject, of I who perceive the elderly, instituting a shift in perception, thinking, and discussion, all sites where words embody a mindset or a culture, often an unthinking acculturation into a certain way of thinking and speaking. This entails acceptance of the on the part of those who perceive the elderly of an alternative understanding, age as a phase in life and not as tragedy, pathos, degeneration, etc. In this sense, a phase is a spot in a continuum, a progression from one kind of being into another, where the earlier being is mildly or significantly modified, changed, but containing elements of the earlier self that often go unnoticed. Adding phase as a consideration to difference, I have these words in quotes, would mean that the thinking in terms of a continuum is enabled and the apparently changed person can be seen in terms of an earlier self as a progression from an earlier self. The elderly in these terms can be seen as continuing aspects of selfhood, into the next phase while taking on other aspects, a feature of all transformations. One aspect of your conference that I noted with interest is about intervention. This can be intervention in the conversation about aging, in the narrative that has developed around age and that has become normative in our society. Such intervention also might mean an invitation. Sorry, I had this handwritten, so a little difficulty in reading. So such intervention also might mean an invitation to stop a while and attend to the elderly, the weak, and the variously sidelined. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for that wonderful presentation. So, sir, yes, sir, yes. Sir, you were muted, please. Sir, you're muted.
Yeah. I thank Professor Nandana Dhakta. Am I audible now?
Yes,
Am I
yes, sir.
audible now?
Yes, sir, you are
Yeah.
audible.
I thank Professor Datta for delivering a very informative and stimulating talk on decline, wisdom, and difference, changing narratives of aging. Professor Datta very thoughtfully addresses the questions related to decline, aging, and more importantly, she raises questions related to the stereotyped narratives of age, of the aged and aging. She begins by referring to some literary and mythical depictions of aging, and then she focuses on the interface between literary sensibility and gerontology. In the second section of a lecture, she addresses the epistemological and ethical questions related to aging. She questions the general representation of aging as synonymous with dementia. Professor Datta stresses the need for more research on the narratives of aging. In a final section, she questions the stereotype narratives of aging and emphasizes the need to change such narratives to help the aged change their self-perception. And finally, she calls for a radical shift in the perception and understanding of aging. And she has done it very beautifully and very, I call it a very stimulating lecture. And her lecture has stimulated me to talk a little about my own views on aging, on the topic of this webinar. I am, as Dr. Pratusha said, I am a flash fiction writer, and I can't resist the temptation of presenting a very, very short story related to an aged man, an old, ailing aged man. The Fly is the title of this story. A fly is sitting comfortably on a sick old man's arm, addresses him gently. The fly is addressing the gentleman. Sir, I have been bothering you so often, but you don't even try to crush me or brush me away. Other people abhor me. They take all measures to keep me at bay. But you are amazingly tolerant. Why? The ailing old man replied in a sinking voice, all my life I cared for my people. I looked after them when they were ill. But today I am lying here as a neglected piece of wood. No one around. Is it bad to be good? My loneliness is killing me faster than my disease. You are my companion, my savior. How can I brush you away? And the last line, the fly shed a tear and flew away. This is a pathetic, description of what troubles old people in their old age, in the time of their disease, when they're suffering. They are suffering not only from diseases, they are suffering from other things, psychological problems, as Professor Jalauddin Patil pointed out. There are psychological problems also. So this story, it tries to portray that. I'm also tempted to refer to a very important essay by G.K. Chesterton. As I, said, thinking about this webinar, the topic of this webinar, I was reminded of G.K. Chesterton's essay on the pleasures of no longer being very young. Professor Datta, I would like to tell you that the narratives, if you want to have an example of the correct narrative, or the type of narrative you want to have, of the aged and the aging, I think this can serve, Chesterton's essay can serve a very good example. When he talks in paradoxical terms about the advantages of old age, one of the advantages of old age, he says, is that many things seem to be growing younger for old people, growing younger, fresher, and more lively than they once supposed them to be. Old people, begin to see significance or to see life in a large number of traditions, institutions, maxims, and codes of manners that seem in their young age to be dead. So we try to, we begin to see new significances in those things. Another paradox, he talks about is that it is not the young people who realize the new world. It is a principle of contrast, that principle of contrast, gives them an aesthetic advantage for appreciating the changes in life, the changes in perspectives, and the changes in socio-cultural contexts. So there is a brighter side of old age. There is brighter side of aging. It's not always, about diseases, dementia, or neglected, neglected condition of their life, but there is a brighter side. And I just quote, I felt tempted to quote Chesterton here. I thank very much Professor Nandana Dhakta for a beautiful lecture on the topic. And I also would like to thank the organizers of this two-day international webinar on rethinking aging, disease, and death in 21st century for giving me the opportunity to chair this plenary session and to express my own views on the topic. Thank you very much. Thank you, Pratusha.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Professor Datta, for that wonderful lecture, and thank you, Dr. Dugar, for chairing the session. So now we move on to the next plenary session. The next plenary talk will be delivered by Professor Jivlal Sabkota. He is professor and head of the Department of English, Tribhuvan University, Kirtipur, Kathmandu, Nepal. He is already in a wide network of academic activities, delivering talk and writing for academic journals. He has done excessive work on migration in Nepalese literature. Some of his books are Iconographical Interpretation of Hindu Deities, published in the year 2014. Sirjana Trishana, a collection of metrical as well as prose poems in Nepali, published in the year 2009. He has more than 50 articles, both in English and Nepali, on local, national, and global issues, published in different magazines and national newspapers. He has also been awarded the Nepal Vidya Bhushan Ka in the year 2019, apart from various other scholarships that he has earned. So today he will be speaking on rethinking aging, transformation, and celebration. And the session will be chaired by Professor Geeta Patil, Professor, Department of English, B.R. Ambedkar, Marathwada University, Aurangabad. So I welcome both of you, and I hand over the session to Professor Geeta Patil. Ma'am, are you here? Rustam sir, has Madam joined?
Yes, yes, I have joined
Okay,
already.
okay, so
Thank
okay,
you,
ma'am.
Pratisha.
Yes, ma'am.
Hello.
Yes, ma'am. We hear you.
Yeah, thank you, Pratisha. I think I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for this wonderful opportunity for joining this conference as a chairperson on rethinking aging, diseases, and death in 21st century. When I looked at this, the title of the conference, the topic of the conference, a little bit nervous to join, let me admit it, first of all. The thing behind this is that after seeing so many deaths and, people's migration, suffering, and, the different incidences happening with the women in different part of the states, as well as in the different part of the world, even, so every time, when we look at the media, when we are talking to each other, we are listening to so many violences, and again listening to the this word death into the conference, I was a little bit reluctant in joining. But let us face the reality of the life. This is what is the second thought. Probably being a student of literature, I thought that let us face a reality and let us discuss it. If we discuss, then psychologically somewhere we get drained, and the things once again start happening in our life with the positive attitude. So I thought that let us face the reality, and I thank Dr. Pradeep Patra sir, Honorable Pradeep Patra sir, for making me face this reality. And the most the person who always convinces, and the very nice to talk with is Dr. Pratyusha. All the time organizing very beautifully the things and everything. So I thought that let us be with our own people's company once again. Thank you for giving me an opportunity, and may I welcome today's, we can say, the speaker, our close neighbor, and we always have the spiritual connection with Nepal very closely. So I'm very much fortunate to chair this session with the, we can say, spiritual belongingness. And the thing is that, whenever we look at the last thing in our spirituality, that is Nepal, we look at. So, with the great remembrance of Pashupatinath, may I welcome the today's speaker. Most welcome to this session, sir.
Yes, thank you.
So, yeah.
Respected chair of the session, Anchor Pratyusha and Pradeep Patra, who is a bridge to make me connected with this galaxy of scholars. Today, I am going to present my paper, Rethinking Aging, Transformation and Celebration. This is my topic. I am trying to incorporate in my paper. I'm trying to incorporate in this paper first introduction with my major argument, and then rethinking aging, after then rethinking disease and death, and lastly I will come up with some conclusion. And I have also composed a poem about senior citizens, and with this step I'm going to present my paper. Okay, now again, good afternoon from the land of Pashupatinath and Gautam Buddha, Nepal. Now let me begin. In the 21st century, aging is defined differently based on humans' perception about how people perceive, feel, and interpret it. In other words, some people claim, in other words, some people claim that aging counts not only with age, but by human feelings, intentions, or behavior that either they enjoy it, or celebrate it, or tolerate it. With the aging, people suffer from different diseases, physical, mental. This is closely associated with the lifestyle, eating, and thinking patterns. The severity of diseases along with aging cause the death. However, the death doesn't only depend on aging, but also with person's day-to-day life activity, hygiene, accident. So aging is not an outcome. Aging is an outcome of different interrelated factors, which are byproducts of an individual's lifestyle, activities, thinking patterns, and the environment where he/she lives and works. All these factors are also greatly influenced by the modern scientific and technological advancement. The last sentence is my major argument. Now I am moving to another step, that is rethinking aging. There are different views about aging. Some people argue that aging is a natural process, and some others view that it is an impact of health issues with the association of socio-cultural environment as well as psychological state. Alessandro Blasimi, it all rightly articulate human experience, all human experience, the process of getting older one day after another. Nevertheless, the passing of time per se is not sufficient condition for aging. It is only after a certain point in an individual's life that talking about aging proper seems appropriate. When there are great number of aging citizens in any country, there will be growing healthcare system. Proper healthcare system plays key role for making aging citizens an asset for the community. In this regard, Helena can have it all hold the opinion with population aging and an increasing number of older people in countries worldwide, issues such as the advancement of health and active aging of the individual, as well as the sustainability of healthcare system, are of growing importance. Multimorbidity is more prevalent with advancing age, as are other factors such as social isolation and cognitive and physical impairment. These factors result in increased mortality and a greater use of healthcare system by older people. People with aging scare of diseases and death, though they want to prevent themselves from diseases and death, they feel all alone in society. They feel themselves helpless and isolated with their growing age and their weaknesses. Good healthcare system, social security provisions made by the state, as well as warm love, care, and company of the family members prevent them from such situation and make them realize, as in the words of Maria Teresa Thomas et al., aging is a gradual, lifelong process and highly variable, characterized by cumulative generalized impairments of physiological function. Nowadays, aging is no more seen as a cause, and the concept of aging is strongly questioned. In fact, aging as defined by United Nations Population Fund is a triumph of development because it shows that people can now live longer because of improved nutrition, sanitation, medical advances, healthcare, education, and so. And because these groups seen need a certain degree of care, the global society should have a strong foundation for the same. In other words, as UNFPA suggests, there should be strong political commitment and solid data and knowledge base that ensure an effective integration of global aging within the larger processes of development. This double position of UNFPA is an indictment of the double position of the aging. There are more and more people who are now aging, but they still need a stronger backup from the younger generation to live with dignity and worth. Rethinking disease and death. Human beings suffer from different diseases. The diseases are the byproducts of the perception, socio-cultural, economic environment, impact of science and technology, as well as ethical patterns of daily life. In addition to this, people face different diseases according to their aging. Vladimir Titerenko writes, many chronic diseases are associated with human aging. These aging-associated diseases include cardiovascular diseases, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, chronic kidney diseases, diabetes, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, scoliosis, neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, Huntington's disease, and many forms of cancer. Studies in yeast, roundworms, fruit flies, fishes, mice, primates, and humans have provided evidences that major aspects and basic mechanism of aging and aging-associated pathology are conserved across phyla. Along with aging, human beings suffer from different diseases. These diseases are related to heart, brain, skin, or the different organs. The severity of these diseases is based on the aging and the environmental or social factors in which they live and work. These severe diseases may cause life of an individual pass through critical conditions. Titerenko asserts the causative pathways are often complex and several risk factors altogether. In the vast majority of patients, there is a history of hypertension. Other well-known etiologies are myocarditis, chemotherapy, toxins, radiation, and coronary artery disease. In the similar way, kidney disease also causes the serious threat to human lives. This is caused by other different health issues. It is the severe illness for which human beings are unable to get treatment easily with reasons such as lack of easy treatment, economic support system, moral support system, etc. It makes the patient feel to be in hopeless situation. The kidney disease, along with the development of its severity, increases morbidity and mortality. Titerenko clarifies the argument and writes, chronic kidney disease (CKD) affects an increasing number of patients worldwide and is associated with dramatically increased morbidity and mortality. Diabetes, mellitus, and high blood pressure are among the most prevalent risk factors for the development of CKD and responsible for the majority of cases. Or the conditions that affect the kidneys are glomerulophytis, the third most common type of kidney disease, inherited diseases such as polycystic kidney disease, and also of renal infections, malformation of urinary tract obstruction, in stage of renal failure, dialysis, and subsequent kidney transplantation are the only available treatment option apart from palliative care. The elderly patients with kidney disease have other problems as well. Regarding the impact of kidney-related disease, Anita Hammersworth et al. Highlights clinically interaction between organs is of growing relevance given the increasing number of elderly patients with many comorbidities and recognition that such comorbidities not only influence the clinical course of a given disease and its prognosis, but also affect the treatment option and therapeutic success. Impaired kidney function associates with poor outcome, mainly burden of cardiovascular commodity or comorbidity with the manifestation of ischemic heart disease, heart failure, or CV death. This. In the similar way, the cancer disease is also the global problem. There are a number of people suffering from cancer these days. Fei Sen et al. Claim high incidence of cancer is a global burden. Cancer cells acquire immortality, control in the cell proliferation, and population expansion. Cancer cells undergo a series of genomic instability, leading to muted amplification or deletion of certain genes that strictly control the cell fate. The cancer disease becomes global problems along with the rapid growth of scientific and technological innovation in the field of medicine. The severity of aforementioned diseases mostly cause death these days are not facing death not only by severe life-threatening diseases, but also with their lifestyle, eating habits, thinking patterns. Simon Capelletti et al. Rightly argue in the recent year the risk of caffeine intoxication has increased due to the more widespread at shop stores, e-markets. Nonetheless, lethal cases from caffeine intoxication are quite uncommon. Common features of caffeine intoxication, also known as caffeineism, a state of chronic toxicity from the excessive caffeine consumption, include anxiety, agitation, restlessness, insomnia, gastrointestinal disturbances, tremors, psychomotor agitation, and in some cases, death. The direct cause of death is often described as ventricular fibrillation. Though technological innovation helps to get new way of treatment and save the lives of the patients, not only this, the era of science and technology has also been the easier access to entertain with drugs, being habituated with caffeinated things and spend life in intoxication. The momentary means of entertainment threatens the life of people and its results death at its extreme point, causing different physiological and psychological diseases. With the intoxicated condition, with its maximum degree, it mainly attacks on heart and mind, and that cause death. However, because the aging group is often regularly associated with diseases and death, they are often stigmatized as useless group. As Paulig and Christ Gillard argue there is a negative imaginary construction of the old age, and the dangers and vulnerabilities associated with the old are even more salient because they, although indirectly, are shown as the possible fate of ourselves or becoming other to ourselves. That means one of the challenges facing the humanity while redefining aging is to not just solve the diseases related to the old age group, but to change the very definition of aging in the present time. It needs to be shown that old age is beautiful and not the corrupt face of the younger self. This, however, is challenging considering the fact that the world is driven by things like plastic surgery and the pervasive need of excessive perfection in beauty is mandated by the advertisements that can help them and ask them to modify their very skin tone and the very structure of the face to adjust to the beauty standards of the society. So what they see is the old age is the polar opposite of the very young age. They have worked so hard to achieve in the young age. As such, the old age and elderly people are more and more frowned upon. A point to consider is that even though people are frowned upon being old, no one can actually escape being old. And it is also the result of a polluted environment that people have started to look older than they actually are. So while we make newer definitions of aging and death, environment related death and disease are also incorporated. Okay, death and disease are not something that we can avoid because of environmental degradation. Ursula Oswald Spring rightly opines that climate change has threatened not just the established political system but human security as a whole. This follows that while we understand death and disease, along with aging, environmental consciousness should be always kept at the back of our mind. Because when Earth is at risk, is title of the essay of Spring says, we cannot, nobody can escape the apocalypse that results. Therefore, to get away from such apocalypse, our Mother Earth should be kept intact. People are facing death because of different diseases and their severity aging and by accidents despite having scientific and technological advancement in the field of medicine and treatment. When one suffers from diseases, the ultimate fear of his or her death at the point of death of someone, it badly generates the sorrow in the family and close relatives. There are not any hard and fast definition of aging, disease, and death. Not in M. Herler debunks aging, dying, and death are no longer solely the purview of philosophers and clocks, but the product of all this science is a body of information that has much to say to anyone today who wants to reflect on aging, dying, and death. Though there are several problems with an increasing number of adults, the emphasis is on reducing the negative perception and consequences of our experiences about aging, death, and aging, disease, and death. Giuseppe Laeta accuses a strong effort is needed to improve the integration of the growing number of older adults to avoid the negative consequences of social isolation, malnutrition, and reduced physical and technological development and personalized medicine. Environmental and nutritional factors together with healthy lifestyle represent the most powerful factors that determine the health of a population, which is encouraging because these are factors that can be influenced by health promotion and education intervention. Nowadays, life is to be defined on a more and more relational way than an individual way. The common metaphor of George Orwell's Big Brother seems to be so true during the 21st century, given that we are always under the surveillance of a political system. As a human being, we are nothing more than a controlled population. This becomes especially true for an older group. And to support this argument, Luis Lavo Guerrero, based on Foucault, navigate about the biopolitics of security in the current century. They argue that in the present system, life is distributed, ways and valued across a shifting terrain of contingent formation rather than identity products. Seen from this perspective, life is seen only in terms of dependency upon others. More than having a self-respect, one has to rely on the other group to get adjustment in the society. Such kind of social inclusion is truer for the aging population, is they are weaker and more dependent upon the other group. That means to adjust in the given society, they have to redefine themselves as a system of security where their life is distributed among their needs as an individual and their dependency upon the other groups. In other words, they become just a population in the eyes of surveillance that takes place in a biopolitical society. Another point is that our human body is itself being redefined because this century is the century of interdisciplinary knowledge. Even human biology and the resultant disease and the death are the product of such kind of knowledge. A particularly relevant is the concept of new biology, as prepared by the UN National Research Council of the National Academy. New biology is a result of the more problems-focused, collaborative, and interdisciplinary research. Each field of interdisciplinary knowledge is important, and many, if not most, biologists have fit in both worlds. With such enhanced understanding in the field of knowledge, one can see that human health and disease, and of course death, would now no more remain a unidimensional thing. For instance, human body is formed by an interaction of the system within, but that is regulated by the outside ecosystem. Now, through such concept of new biology, what one can do is integrate the knowledge of biology, physiology, ecology, and genetic engineering to create a to create a food system appropriate for the human. Seen this way, even the diseases that stem out of poor diet or that happen during old age can be sorted out. So the new definition of death and disease is not limited to a physical ailment and in, but to a broader integration of knowledge, which has the potential to generate breakthroughs in our ability to monitor ecosystem function, identify ecosystem at risk, and develop effective intervention to protect and restore ecosystem function. This is National Research Council, we can say, manifesto. Such intervention is not just helpful for the restoration of proper functioning of ecosystem, but for the whole human body as well. Now, conclusion. Human health and disease, and of course death, would now no more remain a unidimensional thing. There should be integration between biology, ecology, and genetic engineering. Old age is beautiful and not the corrupt face of the younger self. Old age is not polar opposite of the very beauty that we work so hard to achieve in our young age. As such, the old age and people should not be more and more frowned upon. Environment-related disease and death are not something that we can avoid. While we understand death and disease along with aging and make a newer definition of aging, disease and death, environmental consciousness should be always kept at the back of our mind, because when the earth is at risk, nobody can escape the apocalypse that results. We should practice immunotherapy and biotherapeutics in our daily life, practicing yoga, pranayam, and meditation every day. Aging is not being useless, but being transformed into the climax of maturity with empirical knowledge and wisdom. Senior citizens are lofty mountains of leading a lively life by which numerous glaciers get immersed and flowed. Let's celebrate their companion and be blessed by their critical and creative life experiences. Okay, after this, there is a poem that I composed yesterday. Title is Senior Citizen, Source of Inspiration, crossing many ups and downs, gorges and death of valley, facing numerous hardships and hazards, collecting sweet and sour, happy and sad, optimistic and pessimistic, treasure of diverse experiences, senior citizens, uninterrupted, continuous, lifelong traveler. The sun-dried white hair, wrinkled appearances, lively resources of homage, inspiration, and encouragement, lively image of perennial hard work and patience for making life lively. Senior citizens, not the characters of hatred, but the persons to be worshipped with dignity and honor. They are not extra burden for a family and society, but experienced teachers and preachers to instruct the skills for living a lively life. University of empirical knowledge, practical wisdom and experiences. Therefore, accept, regard, and honor them with profound care, love, and affection. May I live, may I not leave the world without innovative accomplishment. May I not die unnaturally. Let me be blessed with long life and bright future. Let me be blessed a lively human being in me. After then, death is not the complete end of life. Disease is not the problem. Disease is further to re-energize, to refresh, and to revitalize us. Death is not the complete end of life. Death is the beginning of new life. Real life begins only after death. Therefore, death is not the complete. It is a transformation. In Sanskrit, it is said, "Kirti yasya sa jivit." If we have creation, we will never die. People who don't have any creation in the present world, they are leading a daily life. But the people who have given us tremendous creative works, they never die. Therefore, we should not be, we can say, regret upon death. And then this is my presentation. Thanking all for listening me patiently. Once again, I would like to thank the chair of this session as well as Pradip Patra, who helped me to be connected with this galaxy of scholars, as well as today's anchor Pratyusha. Thank you all. Okay, then it thank from land of Pashupatinath and Gautam Buddha and Sagarmatha. Have a studious and interactive day. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Jiblal, sir. Thank you very much. It is immensely enlightening speech, and the a different meaning of death has been put in front of us. So that is quite appreciable in this difficult situation. Sir has, given the different types of diseases, the causes of diseases, how to fight with them, and the meaning of growing age. Sir this is very appreciable that Sir has said that how to look at the old people, how to accept the old age. The old age is a bank of knowledge. If the young generation realizes this, this society will not have then the old people and young people's conflict, and we can say that the old age problems even. So life is a journey and life is a celebration. This is what is said by the today's speaker, Dr. Jiblal sir. Even he said that death is a celebration. So, you know, in different communities in India, even after the death, you know, that death is celebrated in different way, you know. People celebrate even the journey of his last abode. So, you know, Sir has very rightly put forth all these things. Sir, you gave a new insight to all of us about the old age and the death even. You know, you made it so positive. The word itself has very negative consequences, but you made it very, very positive for us. So thank you very much. And now I hand over the session to Dr. Pratyusha.
Okay. Sir, you were muted. Sir, you were saying something, but you were muted.
The last sentence. Life is not to be repented. Life is to be celebrated. Thank you.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Thank you, sir, for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that wonderful presentation, and especially the last line that was there in your presentation. Live in peace, not in pieces. That is very significant, and I think that's a positive note that we ought to take from your presentation. Thank you for that, and thank you, Professor Patil, for chairing the session. So we move on to the next plenary session. The next plenary talk will be delivered by Dr. A.J. Khan. He is associate professor. Yes, sir.
Interaction, if there is any.
Interaction. Okay, ma'am. Would you like to, if any questions, or if you would like to entertain any questions? If there are any questions to Professor Sapkota's deliberation.
Maybe question, maybe comment, something like that.
So Patra sir is suggesting if there are any questions or any comments that any participant would like to ask to Professor Sapkota, then please go ahead. You are welcome to do so.
If there is many comment suggestion, I would develop it a good research article.
Yes.
That I modify it, incorporate it.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Patra sirs. Okay. Thank you for your let's say. Thank you.
Okay, we don't see any questions or anybody raising hands. So, sir, can we move on to the next presentation then?
If you have any question, you can mail me. I will answer them.
Okay, that is a good point, sir. Yes, sir. If any question arises, if any question comes to us, then we will communicate to you. So, thank you, Professor Sapkota.
This is very positive from Dr. Sapkota, sir, that anybody is having questions, so they can mail it. So this is what this positive attitude always made him to celebrate the life. Quite nice.
Not only question, but the comments and suggestions also.
Yeah, definitely.
So, sir, then can we move on to the next session? Sir, you are muted, Patra sir. Patra sir, you are muted. Patra sir, you are muted. You are saying something, but you are muted. Sir, we don't hear you. No. noisy. No, sir, you are not audible. It's very noisy.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the next presentation then? Next plenary session? So the next plenary talk will be delivered by Dr. A.J. Dunn. He is Associate Professor in the Department of English, Nagaland University, Kohima campus. So apart from being engaged in various academic activities, he has also lots of publications to his credit. The session will be, he will be speaking on the topic, a comparative study of treatment of death in the poems of Jalauddin Rumi and John Donne. And the session will be chaired by Professor Vishnu Charan Das, Senior Professor in the Department of English, Difu Campus, Assam University. So I hand over the session to Professor Das. Sir, have you joined? I can see our plenary speaker, but I don't see our chair.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Professor
Yeah.
Das has joined.
I don't see him.
No, he has not joined. He has not joined.
But he's aware. He pinged me a while ago.
He was there. I saw in the morning.
He should have been.
Yeah.
He should have been reminded actually.
Let me call him or what?
No. Do it quickly.
Rutusa, he's joining.
Okay.
Sir is joining immediately.
Okay.
Yes, sir has joined.
Okay.
Sir has joined.
Okay.
Rutusa, now you can invite sir and head over the chair.
Yeah. So our honorable chairperson of this plenary session has joined. So as I introduced him already, but he again, let me do that. He is he is Professor B.C. Das. He is senior professor in the Department of English, Difu Campus, Assam University. Sir, we welcome you, and I hand over the session to you, sir.
Sir, you are muted, sir.
Sir, you are muted.
Sir, you are muted, sir.
Okay.
Please
Yeah.
unmute yourself, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am really glad to be a part of your 2 days international webinar on rethinking aging, disease, and death in 21st century. My association with Borderland University has been long, and it will continue for long. And it's my really a rare opportunity to chair a session in which my long-term friend and son of my beloved teacher, late Professor Muhammad Kamaruddin Khan, he is Jamaluddin Khan. He is now Associate Professor at Nagaland Central University, Department of English. I think as per the agenda, he is to present a very interesting topic selected from the area of comparative literature. He would speak on the theme of death in the poetry of Jalauddin Rumi and John Dunn, the English poet. I now call upon Dr. Khan to make his presentation. Dr. Khan, please.
Thank you so much, sir. Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks a lot for giving me an opportunity to present a paper in this webinar, international webinar, Rethinking Age, Aging, Disease, and Death in 21st Century. Now, we after the pandemic, we all of us are afraid of death and dying and disease, of course. Now, this topic that I have chosen makes me to look at the idea of death, the concept of death, from two important perspectives. One is the Oriental mystique, that is Jalauddin Rumi, and the other, he is also a mystic as well as a great scholar in Perso-Arabic literature. Jalauddin Rumi is a great scholar in Perso-Arabic literature. His work, the Masnavi, is considered to be the Holy Quran in Persian literature. So this is one, and I don't think I need to say a lot about John Donne, because Donne is such a great poet, and he is besides learning that he is a poet on some of the great songs and sonnets in English literature, we also know him as a great religious poet. He is a clergy, and some of his sermons stand as very important sermons in the world of literature, and particularly in the clergy, in the world of clergy. So when we read these two poets, we find how these two poets look at the idea of death, the concept of death, from two different positions, and what are the similarities, what are the common grounds that we find in these two great poets, artists, and scholars. So I would like to begin, but before I begin, I would like to express my gratitude to Professor Das, who is my father's student and who is a great friend of mine and a very good well-wisher of mine. When I came to Northeast, he was one of the few persons who was really very, very happy for me, and I'm really grateful to Professor Das. Thank you, Professor Das. You're always there with me, and I know that you will always be there for me through thick and thin. Thanks a lot, Professor Das. Can I start my presentation, sir? Is it okay, sir? Okay, sir. Let me start the presentation. In the 17th century English poetry, we have many echoes of Oriental mystical poetry and Perso-Arabic works and Islamic scriptures. Donne is one of the first poets of the century to introduce an intensely personal note in his divine poems. Now I quote from one of the sonnets of Donne, the lines, "Thou hast made me, and shall thy works decay? Repair me now, for now mine end doth haste. I run to death, and death meets me fast. And all my pleasures are like yesterday." So these lines, then again the important, by thy leave, important line, by thy leave I can look, I rise again. Now, such a personal note expressed in an intimate tone with faith and confidence is could hardly be found in the religious poetry of England in the Middle Age. But the tone and the personal touch is very much present in the poetry of the mystics of the East. Now, here, this is the place where I have tried to make a comparison between John Donne and Jalauddin Rumi, a Perso-Arabic scholar. And this I have taken from the sonnet number 30 of Jalauddin Rumi. I quote the lines, "Thee I choose of all the world alone. Wilt thou suffer me to sit in grief? My heart is as a pen in thy hand. Thou art the cause if I am gold of melancholy. What do I see thou makest grow out of me? Now I smell roses, now I pull thorns." So if we look at the and consider the aspect of death, we find how these two poets try to uh, try to look at death and analyze death and think of what is their perception of death, lamenting over the separation from the Almighty. Jalauddin Rumi, the Eastern mystique, expresses his passionate desire to overcome the separation and strives to come closer to God. Nothing, then I quote lines from his poems, nothing is bitter than severance from thee. Without thy shelter, there is naught but perplexity. Our worldly goods rob us, of our heavenly goods. Our body rends the garment of our soul. These are the lines taken from Jalauddin Rumi's poem, and our hand, as it were, prey on our feet. Without resilience on thee, how can we live? Now, these lines I take from the works of Jalauddin Rumi, the verse called the Masnavi. The Masnavi. Similarly, in the same strain, in the same way, theme of the fear of separation from God and the same echo of the passionate desire to come closer to the divine presence have been expressed by John Donne in one of his holy sonnet. Yet, I quote the lines from the sonnet by John Donne, "Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, For I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, not ever chaste, except you ravish me. So in this way, here we find the poet begins the poem here with a stream of this sonnet is the lines are from Batter My Heart, 3% God. The lines just now I have quoted. These lines. The poet here begins the poem with a stream of arguments to undermine man's greatest fear and apprehension of death. After all, who has not questioned the nature of his or her existence after dying? Philosophers have successfully failed to answer what happens after death. And this has probably made people more curious to know about life after death, if there is any at all. People across time and places tend to fear the unknown. Dunn ends his admonishment very boldly with the phrase, "Death, thou shalt die." By introducing constitutional rhythm, Donne broke new ground in the realm of English poetry. Here too the poet seems to have favored apostrophes and dramatic monologue that tend immediacy and urgency to his rhetoric. In a typical metaphysical approach, Donne castigates the power and negates the dreadfulness of death. Adept at religious concepts, Donne says rest and sleep are pictures of death. Since rest and sleep refresh and relieve us, death being something akin to sleep would certainly be more salubrious. The argument, however spurious, reinforces his point of view and allays the fear of death. The lines I quote from Death Be Not Proud sonnet, "From rest and sleep, which but thy pictures be, much pleasure, then from thee much more must flow." Metaphysical use of language helps dispel the fear of death and reinforces the idea that sleep, being pictures of death, could be but a brief state of death. Then this concept I would like to compare with the scriptures, Islamic scripture, that is the Holy Quran. The comparison made between sleep and death echo the words here, as we find the echo in the scripture. God receives men's soul at the time of their death, and that soul which dies not yet in its sleep, he keeps that soul for which he has ordained death and dismisses the rest till an appointed term. It therefore becomes clear that during sleep, the soul leaves the body and remains in the position of the creator. Now, this is one of the argument. When I say it is clear, means as propounded by these two poets and found in both the found across the culture, Christian culture as well as Islamic culture. The soul returns to the body by the creator's bidding, unless the creator ordained death for that person. With regard to sleep being a state of calm and comfort, the scripture declares, "And it is he who makes night a covering for you, and sleep repose and makes day a resurrection. The words of the scripture substantiates that sleep indeed alleviates stress and strain. Once again, there is another declaration I take from Perso-Arabic sources. And we have created you in pairs and have appointed your sleep for repose and have appointed the night as a cloak and have appointed the day for livelihood. Thus, the Holy Sonnet illustrates, sonnet number 10 illustrates quite a few Christian concepts that run parallel with Arabic works. Some of the Perso-Arabic works, I would repeat Perso-Arabic run parallel with some of the Perso-Arabic works. Some of the thoughts, however, related with Christianity are contradictory to some of the Perso-Arabic works. In the opinion of the speaker, death is merely functionary, a slave to fate, chance, kings, and desperate men. Furthermore, the speaker argues that its habitat is amongst poison, war, and sickness. Here it could be noted that the arguments mentioned above run contradictory to Perso-Arabic sources or works. It is pertinent to note here that all these things are the creation of God. Hence, these things are but the slaves of the maker, the creator, the God. So, in the Perso-Arabic works, it has been said that nothing can harm or kill a man without the order of the creator. He is the omnipotent over his slaves. He sends guardians over you until when death comes. To one of you, our messengers receive him, and they neglect not. Then they are restored to the Creator, the Lord, the just. Surely he is the judgment, and he is most swift of reckoners. The argument is also somewhat contradictory to the Perso-Arabic sources or works or belief. I have taken this argument from one of the Perso-Arabic sources, and I quote it from that place. And you should know that if the nation gathered together to benefit you, they will benefit you only with something that the Creator has decreed for you. And if they gather together to harm you, they will harm you only with something the Creator has decreed for you. These words of the prophet, peace be upon him, evidences the Creator's control and power over everything. And at the same time, it de-establishes Dunn's opinion regarding anyone's control over death. So there are two things. One is the common ground, and the other is the differences that we find in the places in the Perso-Arabic works, particularly Jalauddin Rumi and some other works, and then John Donne's poetry. And that's it. And the differences also, socio-cultural differences that we find across cultures. That's it. Furthermore, it is a known fact that death does live in poison, war, and sickness. But it would be wrong to say that these things have the power to kill a man by themselves without the Creator's order. Here, I would like to quote a few things from the Perso-Arabic sources. O you who believe, be not as those who disbelieved and said of their brethren who went abroad in the land or were fighting in the field. If they had been with us, they would not have died or been killed. That God may make it anguish in their hearts. God gives life and causes death, and God is the seer of what you do. These words of the Creator establishes the fact that only the Creator causes death. Battles and wars can never harm a person unless the God decreed it to be so. The last two lines of the sonnet are important from a comparative Islam Christian point of view. One short sleep past, we wake eternally, and death shall be no more. Death, thou shalt die. By using the technique of personification, Dunn puts death on the same level as himself, thereby demonstrating that death is something mortal and is therefore neither alarming nor frightening. Now, in Islam as well as in Christianity, physical death serves as a portal to eternity. Hence, the Arabic word intiqal does not imply death. It refers to muntakil. It means in essence that when a man dies, he is transferred from the transient to the eternal world. After that, there is no death. It is important from Islamic point of view that on the day of judgment, that is Yawmul Qiyamah, God will judge everyone and decide his fate. A virtuous person will enter heaven and evil one will, both we find this thing both in Christian and Islamic point of view. One will be thrown into hell. After this, as per the bidding of the Creator, there shall be brought in the shape of a ram. Creator will then address, O dwellers of heaven, do you recognize this? And they will reply, yes, we do. Similarly, the Creator will address, O dwellers of hell, do you recognize this? They will answer, yes, we do. Finally, as per the Creator's command, death shall be slaughtered on the borders of heaven and hell. The Creator will declare, now there is eternal life for both the virtuous and the evil. Thus records. So this the record the Perso-Arabic sources. Death will be brought in the shape of a ram and made to stand between heaven and hell. Then it is said, O people of paradise, they will crane their necks and look. Then it is said, O people of hell, they will crane their necks and look and feel that relief has come. Then death is sacrificed. It is said, O people. So in this way, to conclude the paper, I present here the parallel between the Islamic concept and the Christian concept, wherein death is brought in the shape of a ram, who we do get a clear picture of death. It is pertinent to note here that based on this concept, the Arab poets and mystics have often explored the idea of the Judgment Day and have given a visual picture of the day in their own vacuo tentative, convincing method, which Dunn appears to follow in his poem Death Be Not Proud. As may be seen in Rumi's poem, be sure the judgment day will drew out what good or ill, so even thou hast done in this life, and interpret all thy dream. O tyrant, who didst tear the innocent, thou from his heavy slumber shall rise. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot to everyone. I think my time is over. It is already half an hour.
Thank you, Dr. Jamal Khan.
Thank you,
dear participants, Dr. Khan has made a point to make a comparative assessment of Rumi, the Arabic mystic poet, and he has tried to juxtapose the philosophy of death as adumbrated in the poetry of Rumi with that of John Donne. by citing copiously from the holy sonnets, and he delivers with the perception of death, and how death is also personified, and how there is constant fear and apprehension of death. And finally, there is a confident note that death is not a curse, death is a blessing, and it is everything in the hands of the Almighty. This is the core of his paper. Now the paper is open for discussion, and I request Dr. Bhomik to coordinate and to note down the questions in the chat box. Now the plenary talk is open for discussion.
Okay.
Questions, queries, suggestions?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Let me see. Let me check the chat box if any questions are there. In the meantime, participants can go ahead and ask their questions or any kind of comments that they would like to make. So you are welcome to do so.
Either the paper is too good or the paper is too bad. So therefore, there are no questions, sir.
The paper is top
No,
because
sir.
it is philosophy. It is philosophy. Philosophy of death.
Because
Oh
the
my God.
topic itself is very serious, sir. So it keeps people,
Yeah, exactly.
I think people are
Very
thinking about it.
No, this is just I have presented my point of view, sir. This is a comparative study, sir. So I have tried to find the common ground as well as the where they differ from one another, the differences and the similarities, and these things we find in both the cultures, across cultures. So it's a kind of cross-cultural. If I'm not wrong, sir, with your permission, I would like to say, sir, it's a kind of cross-cultural, this thing. Presentation. So that's it. Sir, I would like to know your opinion because you are a master in comparative study. Please, sir.
No, I reserve it. Let the question hour be over. If any question is there in the chat box.
Sir, I
Sir,
don't see any questions, but I can
Dekha,
see lots of
sir, I have
appreciation.
a query, sir.
Yeah, please.
Rustam, sir.
Sir. Sir,
Rustam, sir, please go
could
ahead.
hear some lecture. So actually, since sir's paper is concerned with some Oriental and the Occidental or Western concept of death. So what is the difference between the Western concept of death and Eastern concept of death or Oriental concept of death? So basically, the Asian concepts of that and the Western concept of that. So, sir, can you explain a little bit?
Yes, very much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. I got your point. The thing is, from this paper, from the point of view of the paper, sir, if I'm talking only about, I have taken this, I have taken this idea from reading some of the poems from Dunn and some of the poems of other poets. So what I find here, sir, is that, Dunn in his sonnets say that, sickness and poison and war controls death. So they are sort of what? They become the master. But in my opinion, from Oriental, the point of view of the mystique, that is Jalauddin Rumi, understand? As per the Perso-Arabic sources, it is found that only with God's, the Creator's command, okay, man dies. Some of them, even when they fall, they fell ill, and some of them they go to war. They seriously get injured. Some of them take poison. Some of them they don't die. Some of them don't die, but many die. So from this point of view, what I mean to say here, there is a difference here. One argument says that sickness, poison, war controls death. But the Occidental idea, the Occidental notion, but the Oriental notion, as per the notion of Jalaluddin Rumi, understand, It is under the control of the creator. Only when the creator wants someone to die, the person dies. Only then the person dies. So it is not in the hands of, or it is not in the control of poison or war or sickness. Understand? Rather, it is under the control of the creator. So that's what the notion is. That is the difference between the Oriental and the Occidental. That's it. And some other things are there also. With due apology to Professor Das, because he's an expert on that area, philosophy and those areas. That is his area. Understand? This is this. That is
Okay. Thank you. I think Dr. Brahma got the point.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Now, any other question from the audience side, from the participants, or from the chat box? Please ask.
No,
Seminar.
yeah, no questions, sir. But lots of people are appreciating
Epaulets.
a lot, and I can see Professor
Yeah, Professor Sharma is there.
raising his hand. Sir, you are welcome, sir.
Yeah. Professor Sharma is there. You are welcome.
Thank you, Professor Das, for giving me an opportunity.
Yeah.
Professor Pradeep Patra is a very good organizer. He always brings me in whenever the opportunity is there. My small query is if both these authors were also familiar with each other's works, Rumi and John Donne.
No, sorry, no, sir. I have nowhere I have found any references to in the poems of Donne to the poems of Donne. Donne didn't have any access to the poems of Jalauddin Rumi.
Okay, Dr. Rustam was talking about Western perspective, Occidental and Oriental. Both
Yes,
these
sir.
philosophies, the Christian tradition as well as the Muslim tradition, both of them sprung up in the same area.
Yes,
And
sir.
as a matter of fact, this Quranic tenets are simply a continuation of whatever is there in the Abrahamic tradition. And there is no new philosophy that has been advanced.
Okay,
And
sir.
if no new philosophy has been advanced, it should be seen as a continuity. After all, this idea that you are expounding and saying that Rumi has talked about that without Allah's permission, nothing will happen. This idea is there in the Bible also, in the Old Testament, in the New Testament also.
Yes, sir. Of course. Yes, sir.
And when Dunn was talking about all these diseases, etc., he was referring to the Great Plague, etc., that had taken place.
Yes.
Of course, those diseases must have come from with the permission of God only. After all, nothing moves in this world without His permission. So I don't see any differences. I find that it is simply the continuation of the same idea.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sharma. Thank you for your illuminating question. Any other question? Otherwise, I would like to sum up. Any other question from the viewers, participants, suggestions?
No, sir. I don't see any questions, but people are appreciating the presentation a lot.
Okay, we must thank all of them and thank the paper reader. I would like to wind up within a minute by summarizing what we discussed today. It's a very topical topic in the context of the COVID-19, and the concept of death is really an altruistic and a very rather what should I say, ambiguous topic, because death has been interpreted in very many ways. But the fundamental point that he makes is that death is a gateway to heaven. And again they talk about waking. Death is not dying, death is waking. And sleep is a gateway to heaven. And that is established and vindicated in our Indian Upanishadic tradition, because death is immortal. In Upanishad and Bhagavad Gita, it is brilliantly adumbrated that this soul does not die. Neither fire, nor water, nor wind can destroy this. Nainang chindanti sastrani, nainang dahati pavaka, Na channang kedan chapo na sosoiti maruta. This soul is indestructible. This is what Lord Krishna advised Arjuna in the battle of Mahabharata in Bhagavad Gita. So that is reiterated in most of the Upanishads, and Rumi is presenting the Eastern perspective, because the Eastern world is more or less similar, because we believe in the Bhakti tradition. But what distinguishes the medieval position from the Renaissance position? Don't forget that John is essentially a Renaissance poet, and he was profoundly under the impact of Renaissance humanism, which was also a beautiful topic of my late guru, Professor Muhammad Kamaluddin Khan, because he used to teach us about Renaissance humanism. And it is this humanistic touch that has made him this personal note. Oh, death, thou shalt die. This is not there in Indian metaphysical tradition. No poet, no Vedic Upanishad said, oh God, don't kill me. Oh death, you cannot die. In Vedic hymns, no, we invoke the Lord of water, the Lord of clouds, the goddess of these things. There are lots of Vedic hymns invocations, but there is no questioning and there is no threatening, death, thou shalt die. This is nothing but a direct impact of Renaissance humanism, and as Dr. Khan has said, personal note, and in the context of the Renaissance, apart from the other topical things, socio-political things, what Professor Sharma was referring to. And anyway, there are, in comparative literature, there are commonalities as well as differences. Differences are bound to crop up, because this is the difference between the medieval perspective represented by Rumi and the Renaissance perspective represented by John Donne. Otherwise, basically, the philosophy of death is that death is a must, and death is a gateway to a level of that called eternal bliss, or what you say in Upanishad, Ananda, that state of perpetual bliss when the soul is in communion with God. With these few notes, I thank Dr. Jamal Khan for presenting this comparative topical lecture in the backdrop of COVID-19. And I also call upon the viewers and the participants to develop some kind of knowledge of philosophy, both Oriental and Occidental, because literature nowadays in a multilingual, multicultural condition cannot be separated from philosophy and other things, because we embrace knowledge as a whole. There is gone are those days of new criticism. We have to embrace everything in the post-colonial situation. We have to read anthropology and sociology and politics, history, religion, and philosophy is the core point behind every poet, whether it is Shakespeare or Donne or Romantics. So philosophy constitutes the core of the entire lecture, and I hope the participants have been fruitful or have enjoyed this lecture in true sense. With this, I wind up, and I thank the organizers of this 2 days international webinar on rethinking aging, disease, and death, because disease and death are inseparable from human life. And I thank you again, and thank the organizers for inviting me to share this session. With that, this is what I wind up from my side. Over to Dr. Pratisha Bhomik for a vote of thanks.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Khan, for that wonderful presentation. And thank you to Professor Sharma also for his response to the presentation. We also thank Professor Das for chairing the session, and also for his valuable comments on the paper. So we thank you all, and we break for lunch now, and from 2 to we meet at 2 again, and we have the plenary session from 2, which will be delivered by Professor Lynn Pierce. She is from the Department of English and Creative Writing, University of Lancaster, UK. Request all of you to come and meet at 2. Yes. Yes, Professor, you were saying something.
Yeah, at 2 o'clock, so we have a rest to lunch now. We students will problems at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so sir was saying that at 2 o'clock we have to meet again, sharp 2 o'clock, because we have to begin the plenary session to be delivered by Professor Lynn Pierce of UK. So please, it's a request to everyone to come back on time. Thank you so much. 2 o'clock?
Thank you.
Sir, it's very difficult to hear you. It's very noisy.
2 o'clock, 2 o'clock, carrying keynote speech.
Oh, 2 o'clock, there is keynote speech. Yes, sorry, it's my mistake. I was telling plenary session. Yes, it's a keynote address to be delivered by Professor Lean Pierce. And yeah, so it's from 2 to 3. So it's my mistake. So I was, telling all the time it's a plenary speech, but the keynote